Hey developers, today we're gonna look at over 3 hours of content on Vue.js 3. That's over several different projects. We're gonna look at a Pokemon app, we're gonna look at a Stripe checkout app, we're gonna look at an iTunes search app, we're gonna learn all about the script setup, we're gonna look at Vue 3 project ideas, we're also gonna look at render functions, we're gonna compare React versus Vue, and then we're also gonna learn about Vite. So this is like a complete series on Vue.js 3. I've actually compiled this from some of my previous videos all together. I deleted out a bunch of extra stuff, so it's just one video. I'll put links in the description so you can jump around each different section or different video. So make sure you check that out. And also, if you're a fan of this type of stuff, make sure you click that subscribe button. I'm really trying to hit 100,000 subs. If you could do that, that'd be awesome. So yeah, let's just jump right into the videos. All right, so we are in the app right now. So this is what we're gonna create. So here, we call it the Pokemon Picker app. You can type in the name of the Pokemon you want, like for example, Bulbasaur. You click here, and then it gives you a little bit of a card and some information. It shows the front and back of the Pokemon. So this is all retrieved from the Poke API. You see here, you can also see what types it is. You see the front and back. If you click here about the back, if you click back on the banner, it goes back to the front page, and then you can search again. I don't know, like a Raticate. I'm not pronouncing that right. Apologize. Leave a comment below the correct pronunciation. But yeah, so this is really simple, but there's a lot of interesting details behind this app that I think would be fun to learn. And since we're using the composition API, I can kind of show you how I did that as well. Now, to give a shout out, this is the Poke API. I'll put a link in the description below. It's 100% free, RESTful API. It's really simple to use. You just send some parameters over the URL. It works. It doesn't require any authorization or API keys or anything like that, so you can kind of test it out. It probably does rate limit you. So obviously, if you were using this in production, it probably would not work, meaning that you can only send a certain amount of things to the website before it wouldn't allow you to send any more information in. So that's the app, but let's take a look at how we would create that. So we are using Vue.js. We're using the latest version, and we're going to use Vue 3. So I am in my VS Code. I opened up the terminal here, and the way I would start this is I would make sure I had Node installed, of course. So if you don't know how to install Node, check out, I've done some other videos on Node, but you just basically go to nodejs.org and you install it in your local operating system. Then you want to install Vue CLI. And by the way, if this is too easy for you, I'll put links. If you look at the video itself, there'll be timestamps. You can jump around this video, jump around to a section that's a little bit more advanced for you, I guess you should say, or more at your level. But I'm assuming you know nothing about Vue, so that's where we're going to start. So you do npm install tacg at vue/CLI in the command line, and this will go ahead and install Vue for you. I've already done that, so I won't do that again. Now to create an app, you do Vue create, and then we'll call it the Pokemon app. And then this will ask you for a few questions. Now I've run this in the past, and I got this ASD here. Don't worry about that. You can set different presets, and I did that at one time. So I'm going to manually select features, and this time I'm going to use a router because we want each route to be its own Pokemon API so people can link to it, and it'll just bring it up. And I'm just going to leave everything else default here. I'm going to use the 3x preview, and I'm just hit enter there, and error prevention only. I'm just going to hit enter through these. Do you want to save it for future projects? No. And what it'll do is it'll go ahead and set up our app. So this will just take a moment. Okay, so we went ahead and installed, and gives us a little information that we want to move to the Pokemon API folder. We can run npm run serve. Before we do that, I actually want to use Tailwind CSS as our CSS library to make things a little easier. So Vue makes that really easy. We just do Vue add Tailwind, and it's going to ask us a few questions. So this is like a plugin system that's built into Vue. It just makes it really easy to get up and running with different libraries. We could certainly have added a bunch of other things in here. I think a bunch of other libraries are already in this ecosystem that we can add. So this will just take a second. Cool. So at the bottom here, it's asking us what if we want to generate the Tailwind config file. I do that always because I use this VS Code extension that helps me do IntelliSense with Tailwind, and it requires that the Tailwind config file be there. So I'm just going to do minimal. Okay, so it went ahead and set up everything up for me. So I'm going to go and open that folder real quickly. Okay, so I am in my Pokemon API folder, and this is what our Vue app, our Vue 3 app created for us. So I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping here. I'm going to delete this link here and delete some of these styles. So this will just take a moment. I'm not going to worry about this Vitor extension error. I'm going to delete this component here, hello world, and then the about, leave that the same. Delete the logo, hello world here, hello world, and I'm just going to do h3 hello world, and I'm going to just see if it works. Just cool. So I'm going to open localhost 8080. Here, there's hello world. Great. So I am now up and running. So the first thing I want to do is set up some params so that way I can pass things to different routes. So that shouldn't be too hard. First, I want to go back to our app view, or our main.js. Yep, our app view here. I'm going to get rid of this. And what I want to do in my app view is just set some styles here to make it look a little nicer. So I don't need this ID nav here. I'm going to do class. I'm going to do a P14. So now I'm going to use some Tailwind to do a little bit of cleaning up. So this P14 adds padding around the sides of everything. And I'm going to do a class here. I'm going to put flex. I'm going to justify center. So just justify everything. I'm going to make the text a little bit larger. And I'm making it yellow 700. So now I have this big home right in the middle. There it is. Doesn't say much. Great. And now I want to change this home to call Pokemon Picker. Pokemon Picker. Good. All right. So this will always get me back to the first page. And this first page, this router view here, if we look at our routes, we have this router file that was automatically created for us from Vue. And it has this home route, which automatically gets added because this is the route, which is the root of it. And then it has this about. And I kind of want to do this one thing. Normally we would call this Pokemon, but we can call it about. That's not a problem. Let's add a dynamic route called slug in here. And we'll show you that in a minute, how that works. So if we go into, we'll refresh it now. Okay, it looks about the same. If I go into this about, I actually have access to that slug and that param, so I could just test this out. I can go route $route.params.slug. If I remember correctly. So let's see here. We go /about/1. Here it is. See, there's one right here. This is the about page. Don't worry about this squiggly line because it doesn't exist, but don't worry about that. Obviously it does exist. You can see here it loaded fine right there. So we definitely know that we can get router information inside our route, and we said about 1 here. So if we look at the Poke API, let me show you how it works. So if we look at it right here, we need to kind of do two things. First, this is the API that's going to list all the Pokemon, and there's a lot of them, but it defaults to the first 20. And you can see all it has is a name and a URL. And if you look at this URL, it has this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, till all the way to 20. So what we could do here is I can list all these names, and then instead of passing this whole URL over, all I need to do is pass this number in. And if I pass this number in to my about route, then I can have the about route just plug it into this URL here and then get the information for this Pokemon. And that's kind of the route that we want to take on this. So first thing we need to do is, can we list all these different names of these Pokemon from this backend API? And so this is the completed one, so I'm going to close this. So let's see if we can do that first. So I'm going to do that inside my home hello world here. So I think the first thing we should do is set this up correctly. Now I'm going to use Vue 3, and we're going to use the composition API. So I'm not going to worry about that components here. And we're going to just grab the information as soon as the app loads. Now there's a few ways we can do this. I think just throwing it into the setup function is fine, and that should work for our use case. So I'm going to use a fetch. I'm going to copy and paste that API URL. and it's thenable, and basically it returns a promise. And we know that we want to grab the JSON, and then we'll have some data that comes back from it, and we want to do something first. So first, I want to console log the data just to make sure what's working. So I'm going to refresh it. I'm going to look inside the inspect and inside the console, and we see, cool. So we have an object, so it did work. Our quick check to see if we got the console log. And since we're using the setup function, we don't really have a data object, but we can add data in here. So first, I want to import in this reactive from Vue. So what that'll do, and this is supposed to be in quotes. Oops. So what this will do, this reactive is a way we can create kind of reactive objects using the composition API that will change whenever anything inside of it changes. So, and by the way, my keyboard's a little clicky. I apologize in advance. So we can do state, and we can do reactive here. And then inside the reactive, we'll have a few things. We're going to have our Pokemons. And we'll have, well, right now we'll do that and a URL ID lookup. So what we want to do is we want to store that number. Remember that number we have right here? This last number here? We want to store that somewhere that we can look up later so we can pass that in to our route. So I'll show you how that works. Okay, so we're going to do state.pokemon, and that's going to equal the results that's coming back. So that'll have all the Pokemon data for each Pokemon. And by the way, maybe if someone wants to go through this video and mark down how many times I've said Pokemon, I'll give you a high five. So then we want to set that URL lookup ID. So we're going to do a data.results, and we're going to do a reduce on it. And if you remember, a way to reduce is we can create basically a new object from it, and we're going to create this lookup table. So we want the accumulator. We know we have the current index and the index. So the current value and the index when we go through this array. And, well, you know what we'll do? We can do this all in one line. And what we're going to do is we're going to have this accumulator, and it's going to create a new object. And what we want to do here, basically, by the way, I'm going to put down here, we can actually start with an object, so that makes sense. So what that does is it basically, as soon as this reduce starts, it'll have this object that'll be in the accumulator. So we'll use a little ES6 magic here where we destructure the ACC, and then so that way if there's anything in it, we don't override it. Then we're going to get the current.name, which is the name of the Pokemon, and we're going to set the index up, which it starts at 0, but we know the API starts at 1, so we're just going to add 1 to it. And that should be it. So that state URL lookup will then be populated with this URL ID lookup. So that's good. So now we have the first parts of fetching the API. And of course, this won't work until here in our setup function until we do something with this. So we want to return these values, and I'm just going to use this thing called toRefs. And toRefs is allows us to take objects and to destructure them. So we'll do like this and have it still be reactive. So instead of having to do state.pokemons and state.urlid lookup inside the template everywhere, we use this to.refs to do it for us. So now we just can access everything by Pokemons and URLid lookup. So to see if this worked, instead of having the whole hello world, we'll just do Pokemons. And so we'll see if this works. Come back over here. Cool. So yeah, we see this hello world, and then we see this big string here, but this looks really ugly. So let's make it look a little nicer. So this is where we're going to use some Tailwind magic here to make our job a little easier. So first, I'm going to create a div, and we're going to create some classes on it. So once we're going to make this 100% full, we're going to make it flex and justify center. Inside of this first div, I'm going to I want to create an input, which we'll do here. We'll type equals text, and we're going to do a placeholder. At first, we're not going to, this will not do anything, but we want to put this in place. Enter Pokemon here. And we're going to add some classes on here. So we're going to do, give us a little bit of space at the top, give us margin top 10. Padding 2, we're going to make it border blue 500, and then we'll put a border on it. And I think that's all we want here for right now for this. Oh, we have a problem because I'm not closing it. Okay, so this input's closed. Now the next thing we want is another div, and this is just a little bit of, we'll have some margin at the top there, and some padding. We're gonna wrap it, and we're gonna justify center it. And then in here, we're gonna have another div, and this is where we're going to actually iterate through all the different Pokemon. So first, I wanna do a little bit of look up here. I'm gonna put some margin left, so each one of these has a little bit of space to the left of it. We're gonna do text 2XL, and then we'll make it blue 200, I think. And then we wanna add a few things here. So we're gonna do a V4. And so in Vue, we obviously, when we iterate through things, we use a V4. It's the best way to do it. And we'll do Pokemon, and we'll grab the index in, and we'll call it Pokemons. And the key will be the index of this div. And now we can just show if this works correctly. If I can type correctly. There it is, Pokemon dot name. So let's see if we did that right. Okay, so here they all are. Let me clean this up a little bit more. I'm going to first delete out this when we're listing all these Pokemon right here. Really, I don't need this, this, or this. And I guess the 200 was a little light. So let's do, I don't know, 400, 500. Okay, so here it is. So now we have the name, and then we have these things. Now, they don't do anything right now, but here we've able to see all the Pokemon, which is good. But we want to be able to link. Well, first we want to filter this list based on what you type in here. So let's do that right now. We're going to go to the URL ID lookup, and we're going to add in a few things here. We're going to add in a text, and we're going to call something called a filtered Pokemon list. And this might be interesting if you're not used to computed properties. So computed properties get changed whenever any of their values inside them change. So they get cached, and then they are also updates whenever any values inside them change that are reactive. So we can use this computed property like this, and then we can call a new function, which haven't created yet, but we're going to call update Pokemon. So now I can create a function called, let's call it function update Pokemon. And now this function will go ahead and filter out our Pokemon text. And so, by the way, since we have text right here, and we have this input, now this is where we can add in a vModel, which will do some two-way data binding for us. So I'm going to do vModel equals text. Maybe not a great name for it, but that'll work. So now we have a text there. And now we can set up this update Pokemon. So first, we want to make sure that if the text isn't there at all, then we just don't do anything. So we'll return an empty set. Otherwise, we want to return state.pokemons, which is that, and then we'll filter it for each Pokemon. And then inside here, we'll return Pokemon.name.includes, and then state.text. So if the text is inside the Pokemon name, it'll return. So now we have this new update Pokemon, and we just need to change what is right here. So instead of v4 through here, we're going to change it to filtered Pokemon. Is it Pokemons? Let me check. No, just one N, without the S. So we come back here, we save it. Everything is gone, but now when we type stuff, it'll automatically filter for us. It's not the best filter, of course, but it works. So we have Blastoise, Charmander, anything with C in it, anything with A in it. I mean, you could probably do lots of things. Now, since we are running this setup, since we just put this fetch right in the setup here, right here, it's going to run soon as the app loads. So we don't have to worry about debouncing the input and then keep on setting the fetch over and over again. We're just going to assume that the data hasn't changed and we're only doing 20 at a time, so it's not that big of a deal. Now, obviously, if we were doing like thousands, then we might have to find a better way of doing this. Cool, so this is working, but we really want to do is have this clickable links to get to the about route that we created. So that shouldn't be too bad. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the router link. So we're going to do a router link. It's router-link. And then inside there, we're going to have a 2, and we're going to bind it. That's what the colon is. And we're going to do a string literal here. So we're going to do about, and then we're going to do that URL lookup. Remember that one I created, that URL ID lookup? And we're going to pass in the Pokemon.name to it. So that should look up in our little hash map. I guess you can call it a hash map here, our little object, where we set up our URL ID lookup to add that index in. So that way we send the correct index over to the about route. So if we do that right, it should work. So I'm going to refresh it here. I'm going to see. That didn't work because I need to do one more thing. I need to move this up to here. And let me try it again. Okay, so now I click. See, you see here 5 here. So it definitely seems to be working. I know that Ratatat is like 20 or 19 or something. Yeah, 19. So this is working correctly. So cool. So we have made some progress. All right, so now let's do the about page to see if we can actually pull up the information about the Pokemon. So there's gonna be a lot of CSS in here using Tailwind. So let's see if we can first grab the information from the back end, and then we'll work on the CSS. So I'm going to add in a script tag right here, and we're going to, since we are using the Vue 3 with the composition API, we can actually import in useRoute, because we don't have access. If we use the setup function here, we actually don't have access to the route, the $route. One easy way of getting past that is to use useRoute from Vue router. So now we can get access to it. So we can do const route equals useRoute. If I type that right, useRoute. And I'll put that in the setup function. And now we can do a lookup for us. So first I'm going to now have a const Pokemon, and I need to actually grab in reactive from Vue as I did before. So now I'm going to do reactive, and I'm going to grab in this Pokemon equals null. And I kind of like calling this state. Just makes a lot of sense to me, so I'm going to call it state. Now we're going to do the fetch. We're going to do the fetch. And inside that fetch, we're going to do the poke api.co/api/v2/Pokemon. And then we're going to pass in. So now we have the route.params.slug. So that should be what we need. And then, well, it's a promise, so we know it's thenable. So we're gonna have res. We're gonna grab the JSON out of it, and then we're gonna use data. And first, I always like to console log the data to make sure it's working. So let's see if this works. Oh, we got an error. State is assigned but never used. That's fine. So what we can do, we're gonna do the same thing we did before. We're gonna use 2refs to destructure it. So I'm gonna return 2refs of the state. So now it should be being used. And if we look inside our console, here's our object, and here's our stats. So yeah, it looks like it came up correctly for this rat-a-tat. Perfect. So now we can assign that to our Pokemon data. So we do state.pokemon equals data. And I think that's all the code that we need. So really now we need to focus on is to make this look a little bit better. So I'm going to delete this. I don't need this params here. I'm going to do a div. I'm going to make sure that that Pokemon is actually there. And I'm going to use some classes here. You know what? I'm going to skip this class right now. I'm just going to go into an H3. And this is going to have a class of text to XL. And we'll do text green 900. I can type right 900. And we're going to make it uppercase. And this should be the Pokemon.name. And we'll have double brackets here. Then we need to have another div. Sometimes my Emmet acts up. There we go. And then this is going to have flex and then justify center. And this one will have a couple of images. And this first will be source will be, we're going to bind it to the Pokemon.sprites.front shiny. The second one will be back shiny. And I'll make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to make this class a width of 48. And I'm going to paste it here. Cool. And then we're going to have another H3. And inside here, I'm going to put a class of text yellow 400. I'm going to call it types. And we're going to have another div. It's another v4, just the structure of it. And we'll do type index in Pokemon.types. We're going to have key equals IDX. And then inside here, we're going to have an H5. We're going to make this text blue 900. And this will be the type.type.name. I think I did that right. Okay, let's see what it looks like. Okay, here's our rat-a-tat. So let's go back here to this df Pokemon. We'll add some classes here as well. So we'll make this width 312. We'll center it. We'll put a background purple, I don't know, 100. We'll have a little spacing at the top. We'll put shadow XL. We'll do 2XL. Flex, justify center, flex column, item center. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, there it is. So now we have a rat-a-tat. We have types normal. We have the back and front. Now if we type in, cool. So we have done it. Hey developers, today we're gonna look at Stripe. We're gonna create our brand new checkout page. We're gonna look at a couple of different ways you can create checkout pages, how you can integrate Stripe into your own apps using Vue.js and Express. So stay all the way to the end and I'll think you'll learn something. Hey, so we are today creating this checkout page here. So this is a checkout page. I'll tell you guys all about it, but for example, you can put in a name, Erik, test at example.com. You can put a street name, I don't know, Sycamore Street. We're Reno, Nevada, 89523. And then it has a credit card field at the bottom here. So it actually, validation on here. And then after you put something in, whatever you want, you can hit pay, and it actually charges a Stripe account for you. It redirects. And if you don't necessarily want to use your own custom form, I'll show you how you can integrate Stripe's custom checkout pages by just clicking this pay $19.99 page. Look here, this is a custom page that you can essentially create, and it's all integrated in with Stripe, and you can actually buy something through here. And I'll show you how you can track this on your back end with some webhooks. All right, so here is the checkout page again that I have. So let's begin, and we're gonna take this in a few steps. And by the way, once again, thanks to our sponsor, .tech Domains. It's really awesome how they're partnering up and helping people learn web development and computer science. I think that's really, really cool. So here's the app here, and I'm going to show you, I went ahead and created 2 apps, really. Just before I started rolling this camera here, I created a brand new Vue 3 app, and in this Vue 3 app, I'm using the latest version of the Stripe.js, which is a library we're going to use. But let me go ahead and show you guys quickly around and show you what's inside here. Like I said, this is a Vue 3 app. I'm using something called Vite. And if I look inside here, this is the index.html. I'm including some libraries in here. First, I'm using this NES library, and that's kind of the look and feel of the page. And by the way, if you want to follow along, I'll put a link in the description to all these resources and this code, so that way you can kind of take this step by step if you like to code along with me. I've also added in some Press Start 2P, which is a cool font library, which I actually included inside the credit card field as well. And then including the source. Now there's a couple of ways you can add Stripe to your projects. The official documentation, which by the way is pretty great. It's one of probably the best documentations out there for technical documentations. It recommends that you use Stripe either as a source tag, a script tag directly inside your header of your HTML, or you can download it as a JSON or excuse me, as a package and install it through NPM. But I kind of just preferred using it as a script like this. I think this makes more sense, and they recommend this because it gives you some more security as well. So here's all the 3 things here. Now, if we look inside our package JSON, the only thing I installed outside that was Vue Router. So this is using Vite, which I created a brand new app. And then I also, on top of that, I created a few folders. So once again, I think I did this so it'll be just a little quicker to go through this tutorial if we have this as a basis. Inside my app view file, I'm using the router. And I only have 2 routes right now, and the 2 routes are home and success. And then inside the home route actually all it does is it shows the checkout, and that's this one right here. So this has the most code in it. If we look inside here, this is just HTML that I copy and pasted in here before we started. You can see here all we're doing is we're using these classes that are built into this library. We have an image that I'm grabbing, this Donkey Konga image. Then I have a button at the bottom, and then I also have a button at the top. Right now, I don't have any Vue code or anything like that. It's empty. So we're gonna go through and add in the actual logic to glue this all together to make it work. So we're going through 11 different steps. So I broke this up into 11 different steps so you can follow along. I'll put timestamps below so you can jump around if you like. So the first thing we need to do is to create a product, as you imagine. So there is a couple of ways of doing this. So here's my Stripe account. And what I did is, by the way, if you go in Stripe, it's absolutely free. You can go ahead and create it at stripe.com. And then I chose this for viewing testing data because throughout this tutorial, we're going to use the test data. Obviously, we're not going to use production data with real credit cards. And I highly recommend if you're testing to use the test data first because that's what makes the most sense. Stripe gives you a bunch of different ways to create to do payments. So you can do subscriptions, you can do one-time payments, and then they have their own products. So you can create like your own pages with your own products, or you can just kind of dynamically create your products as you like, and then use the Stripe API to actually do the payments for you. What I would recommend, like if you're brand new starting off and you have no idea how to use Stripe, it's not a bad idea to create products. So to create products, you just click the little products link here on the left-hand side. I guess I'll make this a little bit bigger. And then after you click the products button, you can go ahead and click add product. And it's gonna ask you a few pieces of information about this product, like the name, the description, You can upload a picture, and then it's going to ask you some information about pricing. So you can do standard pricing, gradual pricing, volume pricing. I mean, to make things as easy as possible, I would just do standard pricing, put a price, and do a one-time payment, and then click Save Product. So I went ahead and did that, and so I created this one called Donkey Kong Country. So it's basically priced at $20, $19.99, and it has this API ID. And so this is the one thing you'll need in this tutorial to show you how this works. So make sure you copy and paste this API ID. And the next thing it is, if you really didn't want to use technology at all, and for example, you didn't want to actually create your own web page, at this point, you can click this View Payment link, copy and paste this, and then just paste it into your URL. And here you go. Here is a whole dedicated site for your product. And it even has Apple Pay. It has Google Pay, that is. And you can just have someone, you can send this link to somebody and they can pay for whatever you're doing. And then you would have to figure out how to figure out after that actually someone paid. So you could like either look at the dashboard. You can use a service like Zapier too. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Zapier, but it's just like it's a service that you can connect in with Stripe that you can connect to another product. So you can like send yourself an email when someone purchases. And this would require like not having a website at all. You could just share this URL with people. Probably the best bet, and I think the next thing we want to do is let's see how we can create a redirect button to product so we don't have to do this. So instead of having to like just copy and paste this link everywhere, let's say I have a website and I just want it to redirect to this page, and then I want it to go to its own success page or its own failure page. So if you actually fill in all this information and click pay, it'll just tell you like, congratulations, you paid, but you can't really customize it or edit it very much. So it's not super useful. So let's see how we would do that. I want to have this button go to that page. That's that page we just saw, and then have a way to actually be able to go to a success page or failure page. I'm going to turn off my camera so you can see the whole page here. My face isn't in the way. All right, so let's begin here, and I'm going to create, since we're using Vue 3, I have this setup function here, and I can just go ahead and put anything I want in here to do setups or redirects. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create something called redirect. And what this redirect is going to do is I want it to redirect to a checkout page when someone clicks this. So I have this right up here at the top, this button. I'm going to do an @click event, and I'm just going to go to my new redirect URL, redirect method that is. And the next thing we need to do is actually get Stripe set up here, and then we can have this redirect do something. So we're going to do is I need to first, inside the setup function, I'm going to create something called Stripe. It's going to be null. And then I want to set up Stripe here. And before I do this redirect, actually I'll make sure I pass it back, is I'm going to use the hooks. So don't get confused. Don't try to set up Stripe directly inside your setup. Use one of these setup hooks, and one of them is called onMounted. So I'm going to use onMounted here, and it's going to be async. And then this is going to return this is basically a function here, and then this is where I can kind of set up Stripe for the first time. So right up here, I'm going to import load Stripe from, and then @Stripe, Stripe.js. So I'll make sure it's loaded. And then in this onMounted, I want to load it correctly. So I'm going to do Stripe equals await, load Stripe, and then I need to put the Stripe key in. So to get our keys, if you go back to Stripe, you can go to the developers and then go to API keys, and we'll need to grab the publishable key and then secret key. I'm not going to show you my secret key, but what you need first is when you're on the client side, you use the publishable key, and then when you're on the server side, you use the secret key. So I'm going to copy the publishable key. And since I'm using Vite, this is kind of a Viteism, I should say. I can create env file. And if I did that, oops, I didn't name that right. I'm going to rename this to .env. And inside this env file is where I can now put in some secret codes that I want. So I'm going to create one, and since it's Vite, I have to always call it Vite at the beginning with an underscore key. And I'm going to go ahead and paste this key in that I just got from that other screen. Cool. And now inside my checkout here, I should be able to go ahead and import it in. And the way you import it in through Vite, and this is going to be changed if using Vue CLI, but you can do import.meta.env.vite stripe key. Awesome. So now, as long as this works, Stripe should be set up correctly. Now, I could wrap this in a try-catch block or try to catch the errors, but since we're just doing a quick demo, I'm not going to do that. But that's probably what you want to do if you're in a real production app. So now I have Stripe set up correctly. I can now do stripe.redirect to checkout. And that's going to take an object, and I need a few things inside this object. I need a success URL, and I'm going to make sure I can just put localhost right now. That's fine. I think I'm localhost port 4000, and I'm going to do success. And then I'll have a cancel URL in case they just end up just closing it. And I'm going to put localhost 4000. So it's just going to redirect back to the same page. And then I need two other things, and this is going to be called the line items. And inside this line items, and by the way, this is all in the official documentation from Stripe, but I'm going to have two things. Now, in older tutorials, you may not see this line items. You might see items, and that's when they use SKUs. So if you ever see SKUs and you're looking up Stripe tutorials, just remember that that's kind of a deprecated way of doing it. They don't use SKUs anymore, and you use line items. So in this line items, I'm going to put price. And the price we want to do is from the product we created. So if you go back to the product here, you need to grab this app API ID, just copy paste it, and that's going to be what you put in this price right here. And then quantity. So I'm just going to put 1. Obviously you could do more if you wanted to, really. And then I'll put mode, and I'll do payment. Oops. Okay, I see that I have a quick bug here. So you can use load Stripe this way if you're using it from a package file. So this would work if I'm using it from a package. But since I'm not using it from a package, I can load Stripe this way. So I just need to put in, instead of load Stripe, I just do Stripe here. And that'll load it correctly for us, right directly from the Stripe that we imported in through the CDN. And then one other thing is I have this on-mounted hook. So I just need to make sure that I import this on mounted from Vue 3, otherwise it won't work. So if I did that correctly and I refresh, cool. So now it's up and running here. And now since I did this button here, I should be able to, actually this button up here, I have this click, it goes to redirect. And then that redirect should go ahead and redirect us and using this price that we did. So let's see if this works. I'm gonna save it again, refresh. I've clicked this pay button. Cool, so now redirecting to my new page. If I click back, it clicks back, it works. Now if I go on this page here, I can put in a test email, I can put in a test credit card, and then name on card, test, and I'll just put some random number in here. And now when I pay for it, what's really cool is that it'll automatically redirect to that success page I put in, which I put in localhost 4000 success. So this is just a random page that I created inside our app. Cool, so we got it up and running. Okay, so one thing we'll probably want to figure at this point is how do we in our back end see that this actually succeeded? So I went ahead and if you look inside this folder here, I have a Stripe example, which is empty right now, but this will be our example Express app. So let's go ahead and create that right now. It shouldn't be too bad. So I have 2 tabs open here. Here's my second tab, and I don't have anything created yet for my Express app. So let's create a really quick Express app to use with our Stripe app. So first I'm gonna do npm init, and I'm gonna hit through here and to ask where my entry point is. I'm gonna do app.js. Is this okay? Cool. And now I want to install a few things to get this up and running. So I'm going to do npm I. I'm going to install cores. So we're going to install cores. And we're going to install .env. We're going to have our, that's where we're going to put our secrets. We're going to do Express. We're going to do NodeMon, and we're going to do Stripe. And so this will just take a moment, and this will all get installed. Great. So we have everything installed. And if we go back here, and let's we'll have to go and create some files now, since we have this set up. We'll create one called app.js. And I think that's the only one we really care about right now. Oh, you know, inside our package.json, I always like to do this to make sure that we have a start. And in the start, we'll do nodemon, we'll do -- watch app.js. Just so we have it watching, and so that way we don't have to keep starting and restarting the server every 5 seconds. Cool. So now in this app, let's add in Express. So I'm going to use, one other thing in this package.json, I'm going to put this module. Well, we're going to have the type, and we're going to type module. And this will tell it that we're using ES6 imports, so it doesn't kind of complain to us. And so we're going to import Express from Express. We're going to import cores from cores. This is so we don't have to worry about cross-origin requests. We're going to do .env from .env. And we're going to import Stripe from Stripe. And let's go ahead and create an app. So we do an Express here. We're going to app use cores. And we'll add some configurations for our .env, but obviously right now we'll just leave it blank. Let's see here. Let's put it on port 3001. And let's see if it works. I'm just do a hello world here. And I did a whole video on Express. If you're interested, you can just search my channel for Express. I'll leave it in the notes. And now the last thing we want to do is make sure that we actually can listen. So we'll do app.listen. And actually, I'll do 4001. That makes more sense. And we'll port here, and we'll do another arrow function, and we'll do console log running on, I don't know, port. Cool. So if this all works, we should be able to start the server. npm start. All right, so it's running on port 4001. If you go to 4001, cool, we got a hello world, so we're making progress. But obviously we want to do more than that. So we want to try to connect with Stripe. And first thing I really like to do is set up my env file. So I'm going to create a new env file. And then inside that env file, I'm going to add in a secret key. And then I also need an endpoint secret key, and I'll show you that too. So I'm obviously not going to do this on the camera, but I'll show you where in Stripe to get those keys. So first, to get the secret key, you got to go to Developers, API Keys, and then you just want to copy and paste this secret key right here. This will show that this secret key here is the one that you use on the server side. Never reveal it on the client side, because that'd be really bad. And then we also need to do this this endpoint secret, and we'll add that in a second. But let's do this one first. And so we'll just 1 second. Okay, so I have the secret key now inside my env file, so I should be able to go const stripe, new stripe, and then I'm going to grab it from the process.env secret key. And now I want to create a webhook. So I'm going to create a webhook, and this is going to be used to make sure that when someone purchases something, that the backend receives it, and then we can do something with it. Like we can send an email, or we can just kind of have it in our system, set it in a database. So I'm gonna put this as stripe/webhook. You can call it whatever you like. And we're gonna do something called express.raw, and this is just a weird quirk of this. It asks you that in the documentation, it says that you need to send it as raw data. And then the third parameter here is going to be my async function, which I'm going to have a request and a response. Okay, and now we need to do a few things. We're going to do this quest.headers, and we're going to grab the Stripe signature. This is actually what should be coming from it. We're going to have an event, and then we're going to do this try catch block. And in this try, I'm going to do this, construct this event. So I'm going to copy and paste this from my other screen just to make this a little bit quicker. So what this is saying is that we have an event. It's a Stripe webhook, construct event. We're going to pass in the request.body, the signature, this header here, and then this endpoint secret. Now you're probably thinking, like, how do we get this endpoint secret? So the way we do that is when you create your webhook, it's going to have an endpoint secret, this signing secret right here that you'll need to get. So we'll come back and I'll show you how that works. But for right now, we'll assume that it's there, and I'll add that in a second when we create it. Now also I want to say if this goes wrong, I'm going to just paste in this webhook error message. Cool. So now if everything goes right, this is where you can kind of check to see the response that comes back and what you want to do with it. And once again, I'm going to copy and paste this. This is really literally from the official documentation. And so I don't feel like you want to hear me type for 5 minutes. So what happens is if this works, the reason we do this construct event is we make sure that the actual information that's coming from this hook is real and that it's actually came from Stripe and it's not just some hacker that's trying to break into our server and that trying to get a free product. So if the event type works, it comes through here, it'll succeed, and then we can do something with it. And the most common ones you have is payment intent is succeeded or attached. And then you can have like payment intent was successful. But right here where this console log is where you would want to like add it to your database or send out an email or do something with it. And this information that comes from this webhook have a bunch of information that you can use. But for right now, we'll just make sure it says console log that it was successful. And if all goes well, then you probably want to end it with just a response that says received true. And this is it for this webhook. So let me see if we can get this webhook working. So the way to test this is you would normally do this two ways. You can use the Stripe CLI, which I didn't set up for this demo, or you can post this somewhere online into some serverless function somewhere and run it. But I kind of found a in between the CLI and just posting it somewhere in a serverless function is I was using this local tunnel program, which if you can use this local tunnel. And what this does is it creates a tunnel. So if you run stuff locally, it creates this URL that you can then share and you can do testing with. Obviously, you wouldn't want to use this for production, but it's pretty handy. So if I come back over here, I'm going to keep running it on 4001. I'm going to create another window here, a third terminal. And I already have this one running right now. I already installed it. I did npm install tacg local tunnel. So now I can just run this from the command line. So I'm going to do lt -- port. And if you see from this one, it's running on port 4001. So I'm going to do port 4001. And now it gives me this URL. And I can see this is kind of gives me an outside URL to see if things work. Now, the first time you run it, it says, by the way, people have nefariously used this in the past to trick people for their login information. But if you just click continue here, it'll go directly to your server. And it only does that on like web browsers. So it should just work when we set up through Stripe. So if I go through Stripe, I'm going to go back to developers. I'm going to go to webhook. I'm going to create a new endpoint. It's going to be this one. But remember, we did Stripe / well, we'll take a look. If we go out of here, it was Stripe /webhook /webhook. And then this is a Stripe webhook. And then you can select the event. So what I really care about is the intent payment, this payment intent. And I just want to make sure that it succeeded. And you'll see, you'll understand that more. So every time you create a payment intent is created in Stripe. And then when it succeeds, basically it gets charged to the account. So then I can select event here. Payment attempt, and I'll do succeeded. Okay, it's already there. I'm going to add the endpoint. You can add multiple ones if you want. And now to actually get this working, I need to add in that secret key. So I'm going to do that off camera. I'm just going to click this reveal, grab the secret key, and paste it into the .env file. So this will just take a second. All right, so I went ahead and did that. Now I can test to see if this webhook worked. So we can do it two ways. First, I'm going to have this window open. Actually, we'll do our server, this one right here. So it's running on 4001. I don't have any information yet that it actually works. So let's run the webhook. So I'm going to send test webhook. Okay, so I just went and stopped and restarted the server. So I think that actually should have fixed it. I didn't make any other changes. So I'm just going to try it one more time. Send test webhook. Send test webhook. Cool, says it was succeeded. And if I look inside here, payment intent was successful. Awesome, so it went ahead and sent it correctly. And now we can test it inside our app. So if we go back to our video game store, there we go. And we go back to our video game store, we press the button. And this will bring us to our page. We'll do test@test.com. I guess it doesn't like this. We can do test. There we go. And we'll just put in some random numbers here. And test 89523. And then we'll pay it. And it should succeed. Cool. So we got payment intent was successful. It redirected correctly. And also, if you look in the Stripe dashboard, which is right here, I can go to payments. And I can see the last one I did was $19.99 from test.test.com at 9:02 p.m. So cool. So it definitely worked. Awesome. So the next thing we want to do, and I'll close this, is see if we can have this checkout form here, which if we go back to 4000, let's see if we can have this go in. Now I did create this Donkey Kong country right here, but it could be anything. So you don't have to actually create the product inside here. You should be able to just send any payment intent that you want. So I'm going to go back to the checkout page. So we did this. We created the product. We set up the redirect. We created the back end. Now we're going to create a custom front end to submit any product. So I think the first thing we need to do inside this one is to take a look at the handle submit, and also to use something called elements. So if we look at our checkout page right here, we have this credit card at the bottom, but it's blank. There's nothing there. So let's see if we can get the credit card to actually do something. So on this on-mounted hook, I'm going to add some things here. So this element, by the way, basically what this is with Stripe Elements, with Stripe Elements, it creates an iframe. And so inside the iframe, it has like your own credit card processing. So the credit cards are never, ever on your server. They're always on Stripe's server. And that's what Stripe Elements does for us. So let's set that up. I'm going to create an element type equals card. And we already have this Stripe account where we created this Stripe, where we loaded it. And now I can do, I'm going to create a new thing called let elements here equals null. And I'm going to create something called loading, which I'll show you guys in a second, which we should be able to kind of make the whole form wait for it to be loaded so people can't submit it twice. So I'm going to do this elements here. We're going to do stripe.elements. And then I'm going to have element. And now this is where we're going to create it here. And we're going to do, it's going to be element style or type that we just created. And now we can actually add a style to it as well. And I'll show you how that works. We have, I'm going to copy and paste this from this other screen, but basically this is from the official documentation as well. You create this object. Here it is right here. And I'm calling it style. And then I can set the base colors, the font weight. I'm using the Press Start 2P font because that's what I'm using on this page. I can do the font size. And so essentially with this, and I think I have one, there we go. With this style here, I can have it inside this element type. So I'm going to set the style of it. Now to really get it to work, we have to mount it somewhere. So I'll do element.mount. And it could be any kind of CSS selector. So I want to mount it right right here for the credit card. So this says stripe element mount point. That's where it's going to be. So I'm going to just paste that in there. And since it's an ID, I'm going to put the hashtag in here. And then also, I created that loading. I'm going to put value false here. So that way we have this loading because it starts off as true. And if I did this correctly, it should mount. Oops, I actually have ref right here. I'm going to import that as well. Always forget my imports. Awesome. So now let's see if it works here. So I'm going to scroll down. Cool. So you can see right at the bottom, now we have credit card number. And we're going to put a number in. And it also has some built-in, if you put some random numbers in here, that doesn't make sense. It has automatic error correction in here. You can also, I'm not going to show it in this one, but you can use this mount here in this element that we mounted, and you can do events from it. So I can have an on event or an invalid event. So if this is invalid, that I can disable the pay button, things like that. But it's a little beyond the scope of this, but I just kind of want to show you. Also, now we have this loading. So I kind of want to use this loading to do a few things. So I have this field set right here. And if I have this loading, I'm going to do this class here. And in this class, we're going to have, I'm just going to call it DIS, but it's going to be loading. So essentially, if the field set is this loading, it's going to, I have this class set in place called DIS, which is kind of disabling it to make it look disabled. And I like to do that also on the button down here. So on this button, we'll put the same kind of class on. And so this will make it just a little nicer. That way someone can't double click it after it's starting to load. And we'll also, when we submit it, we'll disable it too. So we have DIS here, loading. Cool. I mean, you're not going to see really any difference here. But for a second, the whole thing was disabled while this credit card was loading. Great. And then also for this text here, instead of just paying $19.99, we can make it dynamic. So it says loading while it's doing it. So if it's trying to load, then we'll say loading. Otherwise, it'll say pay $19.99. So you can do little nice touches like this, so it looks a little bit better and a little more professional, and it allows someone not to double click the button a bunch of times. Awesome. All right, so now we have our credit card number, but what we want to do is when you submit the form, it should automatically submit it to the back end. So if we look at our next step, we need to set the on-mounted hook for stripe elements with mount. We did that. And now we need to set up loading, and now we need to add the handle submit button. So easiest way to do that, at the top, we have this form, and we have submit prevent. I actually already have it in here. I have this handle submit. So this means that anytime you do a submit action, it's going to set it to the handle submit, and we'll just make sure that works. And since we're using Vue 3, I'm just going to create another function here called handle submit, and it's going to have an event. And I'm just going to console log the hi and then the event. And then make sure anytime you're using Vue 3, you have to return it. So handle submit. Now if it did that right, it should work. So if I put some test data in here, I'll just put some stuff. I hit pay. I'll open up my console, see if it works. Oh, don't worry about that error there. Pay. Okay, so it definitely sent it over, which is good. Okay, so now we're going to create the handle submit. Now that we're going to do this in steps. We're going to first creating the billing details, and then we're going to create the back end endpoint for the payment intent. So it's going to take a few steps here, but let's just dive on in. So first, on this handle submit, if the loading.value, remember, since this is a ref, you have to reference it with .value inside the JavaScript. We're just going to return. So if it's true, we don't want someone to submit twice. And then I'm going to do loading.value equals true. And now I'm going to grab some information out of here. So we want the name, email, address, city, state, zip. And we're going to use this handy dandy way of doing this, which is through this object.fromEntries. And this is just kind of a quick way. I did a whole video on this. This is a quick way of grabbing stuff out of the event target without having to type out event.target.name.value and so on and so forth. And now we're going to create a billing details. And this is what's going to be used when we actually submit the payment. So we're going to have a name, an email, an address, and that's going to have a city, and line 1 is address. This can be submitted to Stripe, state, and then a postal code, which we're going to have zip in here. So we're going to use that in a second. And now we're going to have a card elements. We're going to call it card element. And that's going to grab the elements.getElement. We're going to grab the card. And essentially, we had to remember here, this element type card, we're basically grabbing the element again. And then we're going to have a try catch block. And I'm going to use this. And now, inside this try catch block, we're going to do a response. And I'm going to use, some people use Axios. I'm just going to use fetch. It's a little bit more of a pain, but we're going to do localhost. We're going to do our backend, which is on 4001. And let's create a new webhook. We'll call it just /stripe. And we need a few options in here. This is really important. When I tested this, I messed this up, so make sure you put the right options. We're going to do post, and we're going to have some headers, and we have to do this content type, and we're going to do application JSON, and then we want to send over a body, and we're going to stringify, and we're just going to send an amount, 1999. And then that should return a secret, which we'll destructure right now. And we'll await response.json from it. And I guess we can console log, by the way, shortcut CLG. And then that'll console log the, we'll do secret. And so before we get too far, I want to just see if I can get this working. So let's go and jump on into the back end to our app.js and see if we can create this this endpoint, which will just take a second. Okay, so in this endpoint, we're going to use Express again, and this one's going to be called a post. And one thing, be careful. This is this special. We had to use this express.raw. So I'm going to create another endpoint, but this one, I'm going to use express.json. And when you set it like this, it kind of sets it for the whole app. And if you put this at the top, you're going to have some weird errors when you run this. So always, when you're doing the Stripe webhook, use this app excuse. This is basically setting a middleware for express.json so you can parse the body of the message that comes in. Always put it after this webhook call or it won't work. I ran into that problem. So I'm going to do an app post. We're going to make our new Stripe endpoint. Once again, it's async with a request and a response. And we're going to grab an amount. And I'll talk about this amount in 1 second. Really, this amount here is a pretty bad way to do it. Like, normally you would never put the amount in through the response to a backend endpoint like this, because someone could just change this amount to 1 penny and then get your product for free. So what you'd want to do is you would want to maybe send over something else that identifies this unit or this product. Maybe you have an ID or something, and then you look up in a database, and also maybe you show the amount, and then you calculate it on the server side and then charge it. Otherwise, some people will abuse this and send over a penny. But for this demo, I'm going to leave it on amount here. But I'll put a note here, should never trust the client side amount. And then we're going to do another try catch block here. And I'll just use this. And this is where we're going to use a payment intent. So I'm going to do payment intent. And this is basically in the official documentation, this just tells Stripe like, hey, I'm going to start doing a payment here. Try to record this, and you can actually keep track of payment attempts. It even says like you can do this as soon as someone gets to the checkout page. Create the payment intent even before they fill everything out, just so you can keep track of this. So this actually doesn't charge their card until it's done. Now you can, there in some tutorials you may see people charging the card at the payment intent, and you can do that with an optional parameter. I think it's better though to, and the official documentation kind of recommends this, to create the payment intent first and then pass the secret key from the payment intent back to the client side and then have them complete the purchase. That way, if something happened with their internet or like they lose connection, that they don't automatically get charged. It doesn't get charged until the app loads again. So that's the way I'm going to do it. But I mean, you can leave a comment below if you don't think that's right or you would like to do it a different way. But that's literally what they recommend in the documentation and what I've seen other people do. So if you do payment intent dot create, and then this is going to take in the amount and then currency, which will do US dollars. Obviously, if you're in a different country, you do something else. And then we're gonna have a response.status. We're gonna send a 200, and then we're gonna send a JSON object back, which is gonna be a secret. And this is gonna be the payment intent dot client. I think it's called client underscore secret. Yeah, underscore secret. Cool. And then if obviously there's a problem, we don't want to send the intent, and we'll do console.log, I don't know, error, and then we'll do response.status 500 or whatever one you want to pick. Probably 500 would be great because that's server error, but then you can do error here. And this is it for our server-side code for this whole app. So this is our new Stripe endpoint. And we just grab them out. We're creating a payment intent, and we're sending this secret, client secret, from this payment intent back to the client side. And obviously, on the client side, you wouldn't ever want to save this secret, but it's just used for it. Cool. And I can check to see, okay, it reloaded, no errors. So now I can go back out to my checkout. And the next thing I want to do in my checkout is I created handle submit, create the billing details, create the backend endpoint. Now we need to submit the fetch, the backend in this handle submit, and then create the payment method. It's a mouthful, I know. Okay. So I'm going to go back to this really long handle submit. And this is probably the place where you'd maybe want to break this into different pieces, but since we're doing a demo, I don't care. And also I'm not catching any errors here or doing anything. So we'll just assume that this went through correctly. And we have this secret. And in fact, maybe we could just test it real quickly. So I'm going to inspect. I'm going to go to my console. Make sure it doesn't. Oops, I have an unexpected word, reserved word. Oh, here. I have this await here, this await fetch. So let's go back up here. This await fetch, but I didn't make this function async. And don't. By the way, I'll do, I think it's async. There we are. By the way, if you're using Vue 3, don't put the async on the setup at the top. Otherwise, it'll think it's a suspense function, and that'll screw everything up. So always, always, always make sure you put the async on the event itself. And it should still work without having to put the async on the setup. So if I refresh it again, okay, everything's back and running. We'll look at this loading. Don't worry about this loading error right now. So, or warning, really. Okay, so if I just press pay $19.99, cool. So it came back. It sent back this secret key, which is good. We don't really need it, but we'll take care of it. We don't really need it right this second, but we will use it inside here. All right, so it sent back the secret. So now I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new payment method request. And that's going to wait Stripe, if I can spell right. And this is probably also where having TypeScript would be nice, because it's really easy to mess up the names of these things. Create payment method. And this is going to take a few things here. It's going to take a type, which is going to be a card, and this is going to be the card element that we created. And then we're going to do billing details. And this is going to be the billing details we created earlier. That's this billing details here. Oh, by the way, I know what's the problem here with this loading. I didn't pass it back out. So let me just do that real quickly. Loading. Okay, so now if I refresh it, okay, everything's working fine. So now I still haven't built the card, even though I've done all this. So the last part we really need to do is build a card. So we're going to do error. We're going to wait Stripe, and basically you do this confirm card payment. And then you have to send in the secret that we had earlier, secret. And then we're going to have a couple of things inside here. We're going to send over a payment method. And that's going to be this payment method request. And that's going to be payment method.id, I think it is. There it is. Yeah, that's it. And if it has an error, it'll display an error, and we can do something if this error do something, but if the error doesn't exist, it won't return it. And then we just assume that everything works. We'll do loading value false. I guess we could say if error return, but otherwise loading value equals false. We'll console log, we'll also do a router here, and to route to a different page. And I guess we never, okay, here's our catch here. We could surround this whole thing in another try catch block, but I don't think I'm going to. So I do want to use the use router. So I'm going to route to a different place if it succeeds. So I'm going to do import use router, and this is part of Vue router 4, I believe. And then inside here, we'll add something called const router equals use router. And now we should be able to use this router to actually redirect to the right place. So I'm going to come back down here, and if this all worked, I'm going to router.push to our success, and then we'll check to see if it went through. All right. So let's see if this works. I'm going to put in test YouTube. Test example, we'll call it test YouTube at example.com, 1234 Street, I don't know, New York, 90023. And there's no validation in any of these forms, but obviously we could. And then we'll just put in a random number. And you can put in a test number inside here. So one of the test keys for Stripe is 411111. It's also 424242 is another one. And I'll put 123 89523. And if this all works, we'll submit it. You can see how it's loading. And okay, so we got an error that reference secret is not defined on line 190. So we had an issue here because something is not right. So I have this console log secret. Let's do this. Since it's in this try catch block, I'm gonna move this all up into the side of the try catch block and try it again. Okay, so let's try it one more time. So we'll go test YouTube 2, test YouTube 2 at example.com, 1234 Street, New York, 90023, and we'll put our test number in here. And we'll do 1023 123 895 90023. We'll hit enter. Awesome. It looks like success worked. We did it. So now we can go into our React payments and we'll refresh it. And cool. Here's our test YouTube 2. Here it is. We can also get a bunch of information about it. It succeeded, the ID number, what credit cards we used, related payments. It says the address, even though we're in Nevada, it even gives you a map. Awesome. So we have done it. We have created our own checkout page, and it's all working. And I believe if we check our payment intent was successful too. So it went through here, and we could have done something on this side. Since the client side actually charged it, now we have the webhook got triggered, and now we have it on the back end side too. Perfect. All right, so this is not done. If we wanted to continue on, one thing we can do is obviously add more error correction in here. We could also, in our, as I said earlier, on this page right here, having some better validation would be great to make sure all these were actually filled out before you can hit the pay button. Getting validation on the card number so the pay number doesn't highlight until you have an actual valid credit card would be another thing. Adding in something into our app.js file to do something with this webhook, so that way we like talk to a database or we send out an email to the client. Like there's a whole bunch of more things we can do, but I think this is a great starting point. If any of this was confusing, feel free to kind of go back through the video, try to understand. Hey developers, today we're gonna look at something really cool. It's a brand new library called Petite Vue. It's an alternative to Vue. Let's see what it's all about. And during this video, I'm actually gonna create this app. This is a iTunes search. So you can put whatever you want in it. Let's say Taylor Swift, and it'll bring up the album artwork, the name of the album, and then it'll link off to the actual page with information more about the actual album and iTunes. So this is using the iTunes API. I'm also using a little bit of Tailwind in here. So let's see how we can create this, and I'll explain everything about Petite and how you can get started. All right, so Petite Vue, you can see right here, is on GitHub. It was released, I don't know, probably a month or two ago as of this recording. So the idea is that it's an alternative distribution of Vue optimized for progressive enhancement. It provides some of the same template syntax and reactivity model, but it doesn't have everything in it. In other words, it has a lot of the features Vue has, but it's really small, 5 kilobytes, and doesn't have all the features, but this would be perfect if you want to take an existing app and add some reactivity to it, and you don't want to bring in a whole framework and use the CLI, or bring in Vue itself, which is much larger. So you can see here some of the examples. It says it's Vue compatible template syntax, it's DOM-based, it's driven by Vue reactivity. Some people compare it to Astro, which is something I've never used, but I guess that's another really small reactive library. And if you look at the syntax right here, it does look really close to what you would use in a Vue app itself. And so yeah, I thought we could just kind of go through it and try this out and see how it goes, and see if we can create this at the end. Well, let's go ahead and open up our editor. And since this framework library is supposed to be used progressively enhanced, in other words, take an existing app, I'm just going to create a brand new HTML file and start from scratch. I'm not going to use any NPM packages. I'm not going to use any other frameworks. We're just going to create this all from scratch. So to do that, I am using VS Code. I'm going to do a new file, and I'm going to save it. And I'm going to save it as index.html. And now we are in our files. Since we're in a new file, I can go ahead and use some Emmet here and, I don't know, create some boilerplate. And the first thing we want to do is actually use the CDN version of it. And it even tells you here in the documentation that you can use the production CDN URLs, or you can use the ESM build URLs, but we're just going to use the one it recommends here right inside the script tag. So we're going to go like this. We're going to copy and paste it in here. I'm going to copy here. Cool, here's my script tag. And I'm actually going to use a Tailwind as well, just for some styling. So I'm going to copy and paste that from my other screen here. I'm going to add some basic styles. So I think that's it. Let's change our title here. I don't know, Petite Vue example. And also, I use this plugin called LiveServe. So if you go into the extensions here and look for Live Server, it's right here, and it allows you just to like really quickly take your HTML and creates like a mini server out of it. So we're going to use that for this project. So I'm just going to open up Live Server, and that'll open up on port 5500. So it's actually changing it to 5501 because I already have 5500 taken up, but see, there's nothing there. But if I do a hello world, let's do an H3, hello world. We got a real ugly hello world right there. So the first way you can use Petite Vue is actually use it with this CDN tag. So if you do it like that, then you should be able to just mount it right inside the DOM. So I'm gonna create a div here, and I'm going to create a vscope, and this is something that tells it that, hey, these are going to be inside. This object is going to be available and be reactive inside this div block right here. And I'm going to have count, and I'm going to add a button. And here comes the Vue syntax. I can use @click, and I'm going to do count plus plus, and I'm going to call this, I don't know, increment. So if I did this right, it should show. Okay, so I have a button here, and just so I can see it's a button, I don't know, I can class background blue 300 rounded shadow. So this is a little bit of, there it is. There's my increment, and if I increment it, it's great. It's moving up as I expected. So right here, I already have a very simple example of using reactivity here. I have a number, it's incrementing, it's working. But obviously this isn't the greatest way to do things. You have to kind of create this big object here and put everything in it. You have to like inline it inside your HTML. So let's see a better example of maybe doing it with using the script type equal module, which I think is a little bit easier. So at the bottom of our body here, so I'm gonna go into here and I'm gonna comment out the script. I'm gonna create a new script tag here. And inside this script tag, it's gonna be a little different. I'm gonna do script type equals module. And now I'm going to import in, and since we're doing modules, we can actually do the syntax here. We're going to do create app from, and this is where we grab in the unpackage.com Petite Vue, and we'll do $module or question mark module, and that'll make it a module type syntax in here. And now to use this, we can actually, first way is we can just use create app here, and we can make an object and just put whatever kind of reactivity things we want in here. So the most easiest would be count, I suppose. And then we can even put increment in here. I guess I called it here. Yeah, I didn't even have a name of the method here, but I can create an increment. We can even make it we'll make it a function here, and we'll take this dot count plus plus, and then you can set to where you want to mount it in the DOM. So instead of using this vscope syntax, I'm going to just comment this out, and we're going to create a new div, and this time we are going to add an ID, and I'm going to call it example. And since it's a ID, we put the hash mark there, hash example, and now I should have the same sort of things I had in here. Let's see, and I don't have to put this vscope because it should have the scope in there. So I have a button, and now I can do this click handler. Instead of going to count, I should have access to increment, and let's see if it works the same way. And just to make sure I didn't mess something up, increment example 2 will be the name of it. And cool, so it's working the same way. If you look inside the console, there's no errors, so we know it's working as we expected. So this is a little bit more cleaner, but what happens if you wanted to create like components and reuse those components? So probably the better way to do this is to kind of refactor this one more time. So instead of having this create function right here, we're gonna create a function. So I'm going to call this example func. And now inside here, I can kind of put whatever I want. And I'll just return the object, just like I did before, but it's a little bit more reusable. So I can put my count here. And then once again, I have my increment, which, this dot count plus plus. And then inside my example function, where this create app is, I can just pass in this example function instead, and just to make, and actually, how about we do it, this example equals this got count plus 2. So maybe we'll do it by 2 this time. Okay, and actually we need to add right here, example func needs to be a function. So let's see if it works. I'll refresh it, got no errors. Cool, it's going up by 1. If I do 2 here, cool, it's going up by 2, so definitely still working. So you can even do something more difficult than this. Let's say we want, instead of doing this dot count plus 2, what happens if we wanted to like pass in a prop to it? So let's have a prop here, and this is going to be a object, and we'll just say prop.count. So that'll set the initial amount. So what I could do here is in this example func, I can actually pass in the count and then what I want to start with. Maybe I want to start with 20. If I refresh it, now it starts at 20 instead of 0. So now I've basically created a prop that I can pass into this component, which is really cool. But what happens if right now you're kind of mounting it to one place as example, but what happens if you can actually also set the template inside here as well. So inside this return statement, I can set the template, and that way I don't have to mount it directly. So to do that, you use this $template, and then basically the same thing I had before. So I'll have example here. And then in here, I don't actually have to put anything in here. And if I refresh it, it still works the same way. And now I don't have to like declare the template in here. And in fact, so I have example here. So we can actually change this to a template. So if we change it to a template, refresh, now we actually have to do one other thing. Since it's now a template, we have to kind of call it somewhere. So we'd have to do a div here. And in this div, I'll do vscope, example func, and then we'll pass in the count 20 to it. And if we save it, oh, and we need one more change. We just have to change this example func. We're going to send it, pass it as an object back over. And so I'm going to take this out, so it passes it like this. And if I did this right, it should work. Cool. So now here's my increment. It's working. Now if I put in, I don't know, 25, starts at 25, and actually I can duplicate this too if I wanted to. So let's say I copy this a few times. Yep, here's 25, 27, and they're all individual numbers. Now you're probably thinking, well, how do I share information between these components? Well, you could like maybe figure out a way to like pass in the same prompts to each one of these. But one other kind of cool way is, since we're using Vue, we could actually use this thing called reactive. So I'll show you. So we kind of put in reactive here, and then I can create like a store basically. So I'm going to create a store here. It's a reactive object, and we're just going to put in count in the store, so it's available. And now I can use this store in my app. So I'm gonna have this example func. I'm gonna put store here instead. And then store has a count. It doesn't have an increment. So let's kind of refactor this. Let's add an increment here too. And this is just gonna do this dot count equals this dot count. I don't know, let's do +3 this time. And I'm gonna delete this out and this. So we're actually not gonna be passing it into the prop here. And now we have available to the example func and the store. But what we want to do here, so we'll delete these out. And this time we'll be using the example func, but we want to actually use the store. So inside here, this vscope, I have this count, but I'm going to put store.count and store.increment. So it's grabbing it out of the store instead. So if we refresh it, there we go. So now you can see here, I'm clicking here. It's actually using the store one that's shared between all three, because now we're using this store.count. And so we could kind of share this information. We could also have another variable inside here and then interact between the two. So some would be locally to this example function and some would be like globally. So you can kind of get an idea of how to do this. So I think since we understand all of this, let's go ahead and just try to create this iTunes app. Okay, so for the sake of time, I went ahead and just copy and pasted the HTML and CSS with the Tailwind in there. That way you don't have to spend watching me type in the CSS classes. But for example, we have a form here. We have an input with some shadows on it. We have a button that says submit. And then we have this right here, which will be our results. And we also have an href, so you can link to the actual pages. And we have a h3 and image tag here. So this is what it looks like. Obviously nothing's working because we don't have it configured correctly. So that's where we're going to do this. I went ahead and commented all this rest of the stuff out. So what we need to do then is to create our app here. So I'm going to create, there's a couple ways to do this. I'm going to create this as a store. You could certainly create this as a function, but I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. But what happens if you wanted to reuse this on the page in different places? Maybe you had like a pop out from the right, or you had the top right hand corner as a search, and you just kind of wanted to share it. You can make this as a function too, but I just want to create this as reactive. So in this, we're going to have a couple of things. First, I'm going to have a search text, which I'm going to leave blank here. I'm going to have a results text, which I'm just going to leave blank. And then I'm going to have this search. I'm going to use it async. And the search is going to actually kind of get our search for us. So I'm going to call iTunes search. And we're going to use fetch because we're going to do this all client side. We're not using server at all. And I'm going to copy and paste this URL. A lot of people are asking me. I've done something similar, and people are like, I can never get the iTunes API working. It always gives me CORS errors. And that is true. It is a little tricky to use. But I will show you, I will paste this here. This is the iTunes URL that I'm using. And the thing that people miss is you have to put an entity type. If you leave the entity type out, you'll get a CORS error. So make sure you do that. And I'm going to make this like this. So we're basically grabbing the search text from here. And I'll leave a description. I'll leave a link to the code in the description as well. And what we want to do is we're going to wait for the results, which is going to be iTunes search.json. It should come back as JSON. I'm going to console log it because I've done this too many times now and had problems. And then if this all looks good, I have this results in our object here. I'm just going to assign it to the results, which is like a big array of stuff. And that's all I want to have here. So let's see if we can get this working here in our reactivity here. So we actually do still need to mount it. So let's see here. We're going to do, well, I'll just type it out. Create app. We're going to pass in the store. And we're mount it. I'm going to call this iTunes search. So should mount it. Now this store will have access in this iTunes search. If I go back up to the top. Cool, here it is. So first, since we're using Vue, we have access to all the Vue directives that you know and love. So the von directive, the vbind. So we can do this. On submit, we're going to prevent, which by the way, the .prevent works as well. And we're going to go into store.search. By the way, here's the ID. So this is where we're kind of pulling in the code. And I have to spell search right. There it is. And then we have this button here, and we have this class for the submit. So we want to actually add a click handler. So when it should be caught by the submission of the form, but just in case, we'll just also put store.search here as well. And this is where we're going to put the results, but let's see if it at least works first. Oops, I actually forgot the £sign here. Let's try that again. Okay, I'm not gonna worry about that error right there, but I'm gonna do Taylor Swift. Cool, so I do see some results coming back. They are empty. So let's see here what happened with this network request. Oh, so it didn't get the term yet. So I have this .search text, but I really need it to work with the input. So I need to add in vmodel search text. So now it should be two-way data bound. Okay, let's see if we can search here. And we'll just do Taylor Swift. Cool, so we see that we got response back. And results here show everything that we want. Oh, by the way, if you do have any CORS errors here, one thing I also notice is that the response headers shows that the access control allow origin is this 5500. So you may have to play around with what ports might work correctly for you, and make sure that you're sending the correct headers over. Otherwise, things will not work correctly for you. So just keep that in mind if you have some problems with it. All right, so we definitely we are definitely receiving back a whole bunch of stuff, which is good. So let's see if we can actually get this inside our app so we can display it. So here's the results section. And like I said, I'm just using basic Tailwind with grid, CSS grid in here. So the first thing we want to do is where this big class is here, we're going to add in a v4. So it should be album in store.results. That's where we're going to get back. And it's always a good idea in Vue to add a key here. So we're going to do album.collection ID. And you kind of have to just kind of look through everything to see what all this is, by the way. And this href is supposed to be album.artist view URL. But if it's blank, we'll just have the pound there. And we're also, for this image, which is probably what everybody really wants, well, actually right here, we'll do collection name first. Will be album.collection name. And here, this source right here will be album.artwork URL 100. And keep in mind this colon right here, because we're binding it. That's the same thing as doing a v-bind. And same thing here with this href. We're v-binding this in here. And that way, you don't have to do anything else. So let's see if that works. And refresh it. Let's put in Taylor Swift. Cool. So here we've gotten everything coming in, all the album artwork. Now, looking at the results, I couldn't find like higher quality images, and I kind of blew them up so they're a little bit fuzzy, but you might be able to find, I couldn't find anything really good. They only have these are more just thumbnails, so they have 60 by 60 and 100 by 100 as the different thumbnails. But you can also put in like the genre and the copyright and things like that and the price if I wanted to. But once you click on any of these, then they'll actually go to the page if it's there. So in this case, should be like this. Let's try that. Taylor Swift. And let's look in our console. There we go. Yeah, so now it's working right. It's bringing up the right pages, opening them in a new tab, which is awesome. Cool, so I hope you guys learned something here. This wasn't too bad. I could also now, like this React, if I wanted to, I could reuse it in other places. Hey developers, today I'm going to show you guys how to use the script setup tag inside Vue.js and why you may want to use it on your next Vue app. All right, so before we deep dive into this script setup function inside Vue, I thought I'd show you just a quick example of how Vue works with the options API and take a little bit about the composition API and then take a look at this new script setup. So here I have an app open here. It's a Vue 3 app. And usually typically, if you're using the options API, which was really popular and came with Vue 2, and it also works with Vue 3 as well, by the way, just realize you have a lot of options when you're using Vue.js 3. You don't have to use the composition API or this new script setup, is you would have this object here. And usually you have export default. In this case, I'm using TypeScript, but either that's why it says define component here, but otherwise it just say export default, and it's basically an object of options that you can use. So with the options API, you might have something here called props. You also might have something here called methods. So one of the most popular ones that everyone uses is to do the kind of the reactive data binding inside Vue. You'd use this data option, and then inside this data option, you would return something. So you would return always an object of something. So I don't know, I'll put hi, let's do one called name, and we'll put Erik. And then once you do this, this data, which actually in this case, we'll make it a function here, this data will actually be now available inside your template. So if you come down here to the bottom, I have this template. I don't know, I can do H5. Let's do an H5, and I'll just put in Erik. Well, this case will be name. And if I save it and come back over here, you can see here is my app. It's already loaded, by the way. I started the server, and you see Erik. If I change this, I don't know, to Erik123, you see it's changed to Erik123. Sometimes people, when they're using the options API, they actually like to create an object here. So a little trick here, if you didn't already know it, you can actually return a literal here, do an arrow function, And then you don't need this return here. So I can go back here, delete this, delete this, delete this. And this does the same thing. This is just another fancier way of using ES6 to return an object. In this case, it's the same thing. And we have Erik 1, 2, 3. So that's basically the options API. There's a whole bunch of things here, like I said, methods and computed properties that you just put it within inside this export default object. Now with the setup function came with Vue 3, we have this other option here, and it's called the setup here. And then inside the setup, this is where you could declare your variables. So in this case, I could just put in let name equals Erik, and then I would return whatever variables I wanted to use. And in this case, it'll be name. So if I do it like this is equivalent. See, it works exactly the same way. If I put in Erik 456, you see here it still works as we expect it to. It's just a little bit of simpler syntax, and you put all your information in the setup function. Now the nice thing about this is you can kind of put all your different computed properties, all the different things into one area. You can even put these into different files and then import them in and create something called composables. So you have a lot of options here. Now, if you're using this setup function in this composition API, you're typically still going to have to put in props here and define them with props like this. And you still define components in a components object or array where you have to define each component. And you have to define these components so that they're available inside the template. So let me show you what it looks like now. If let's say this example, we just have something very simple, the hello world. And now we're trying to convert it over to using this script setup. So this is pretty easy. So all we need to do is I'm actually just going to delete this whole thing. And instead of where it says script language TS here, I'm just going to put in something called setup. Now this function will be this kind of, which came in Vue 3.22, this new setup script tag and this new way of doing it. So instead of having to define our components and return them and define them in the components array or create reactive variables and return them, we just can just put them in here like this. So I'm going to put let name equals Bob. And if I save that, it just works. See, right here, I didn't have to create this object. I didn't have to put a data. I didn't have to return anything from a setup function. It just works, which I think this is one of the reasons that this might be the way people in the future use Vue. I really think this is so simple that, let me say, not simple, but straightforward. There are some things that can be complex about this, and I'll talk about that later. But this is so straightforward that I think a lot of people could really understand this and use this method to create Vue apps. So, I mentioned two components. I can actually create a component. I don't have to actually put it inside I don't have to declare it anywhere, and it'll just work. So let me show you how that works. So here I have an empty components folder. I'm just going to create a new file. I'm going to call, and we're going to make the quintessential hello world Vue file. And I'm going to put a script tag here, and let's do script setup. And actually, I don't really have anything, so I'm just going to put in something that says hello from component. And yeah, we'll just leave it empty like this for now. And I should be able to import it into my app view. And to do that, inside the opening and closing brackets of the script tag, I can just import in, we'll go components / hello world.view. And we have to go import hello world because it's a default import from, and we'll make sure we have this here, hello world, import there. Cool, so now it works. So you can see here, we've been able to import in hello world, the component. We've been able to create reactive variables here, or a variable that shows up inside this template here, and we haven't really needed to do anything else. All right, let's take a look at how you can pass information from one component to another using this new script setup. So it's a little bit different than you've seen in the past. So first, normally what you would do is in the options API, you would have to declare a props variable, an object, and you would declare what you expect from it, if it's required and defaults, but it's a little bit different when we're using the script setup. So let's assume that from our really simple example here, that we want to pass in a name. So what we want to do is, I kind of clean this up a little bit. I just have this hello world, and I have hello from components, and I just want to display the name that's passed in. So to do that, I just need to create, I'm going to create a new variable called prompts. And what's really neat about this is there's a few things called define prompts, which is actually a macro that's built into the script. We don't even need to import it in, and it will work for us. So we just need to do define props. And then inside this define props, we'll create an object. And this object will be whatever prop we're expecting to be passed in. So in this case, we're going to call it name. And then the type is going to be type string with capital S. And now we should be able to access it right from here. So I'll put H5 right here, received name, and then props.name. And now, if we come back to this hello world here, I can just pass in Bob123. Let's make it a little more fun. Let's call it Erik. And I'm going to pass it in. I'm going to bind it. That's what this colon is right here. That works the same as in Vue 2. And we're going to just pass in name. And if we save it and refresh, you can see here, receive name Erik. Sweet. So we know right away this is working correctly. And just so you can see a little better, I'm going to turn off my video. All right, so now we have this defined props here, but what happens if we wanted to put like a default value in here? So the way you do that is you can't just add in a default value inside this curly brackets, but what you could do is you use this thing called with defaults. You wrap it in here, and we're gonna have to delete this out of here. And the next thing we need to do is we pass in an object to the second argument, and this argument will be whatever defaults we want. So we're gonna call something called name, and then we're gonna, let's say the default we want is Stuart. Now, one thing this is not gonna work is if you're using this with defaults, we're gonna have to use TypeScript to define it. So the way you do that, we can do something like this. We're going to use these greater than, less than, which kind of infers the type for this define props. And we're gonna have a name, and it's gonna be type string. And since it is optional, since we want it to be optional because we'll assume that if someone doesn't send over the name, then it'll send Stuart, we'll just put this question mark here. And if we do that, once again, it looks the same here, but if we go back to the app view and we delete out name and we save it, you see now it started with Stuart. So that's really cool. Typically what I would do also, I wouldn't necessarily just put the type in here. I would create an interface or a type. So I like interfaces. So I'm gonna make an interface called props. I'm gonna put name and type string. And then I'll just, instead of just having it like this, I'll pass in the props. So this is typically when you're gonna see like in production. So now I have this props here, props.name, and it's coming over fine. And let's say if I take this question mark out and I don't send anything over, you'll see here, you'll get a warning in the console, missing required prop name, hello world string, hello world name. Also, let's say I put this question mark back, but instead of sending a string, I send a number, like 1, 2, 3. Now it will display here, well actually, let me save it again and I'll pass it in. Let's do name equals name. You'll get a syntactical error inside VS Code. I'm actually using a plugin called Volar, which helps catch these things. I would highly recommend you guys to install it. I kind of like it better than Vtor right now. It tells you right away that number's not assignable to string. And you can see it shows up here, but if you look down here in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll get invalid prop type name. So it gives you some warnings in the console as well. But I think with TypeScript, this is probably the best way of doing this. Another really popular option is to pass functions into your components. Now in React, this is done a little bit differently, but the way Vue works is you usually pass values down and you emit them back up. So you kind of have this pattern where you emit and you send data from the child component back up to the parent component. So let's show an example of that. So I can create a function here. I'm gonna call it the pressed function. And all it's gonna do is show an alert that says, hello from pressed function. So something really simple like that. Now I can pass that down, and the way you usually do that inside Vue is you can pass it down and bind it, but usually you want to use this @ sign, and this means it's like an event that you're passing down an event, which is this pressed event, and you can call it whatever you want, and then you pass in the name of the function. Now right now it's giving me an error because it says that it's not assignable to undefined because I haven't defined it. So now going back to our script tag right here, and I'll put it at the top, I can actually use something called define. It's called define emits. And define emits accepts an array of strings. And these array of strings are all the different events that are being passed down to this component. And since we know we just had one called pressed that was passed down, we'll just have it like this. So now we have access, emits has access to press to push this event back up to the parent component, and we can kind of test this out. So to test out, I'm going to create a button that says press me, and I'm going to have a click handler here, and I'm going to call it get alert, which I'm going to actually do at click equals get alert. That make more sense. And now I have to define get alert. Now, by the way, I don't really care which way to do it. Some people like creating functions like this. Some people create named functions. It just depends on your preference. Just for right now, I'll just create a function called get alert. And all it's going to do is it's going to use this new emits that we created, and we're going to pass in, we have to tell it what to do, and we're going to do the pressed action. So if this works, this click handler should get this hello from pressed function. Let's see if it works. Refresh it. Here's the press me. Cool. So hello from pressed function. So it worked as we expected. And it's going to work. These events work just as they've done in previous versions of Vue. So let's say you wanted to actually pass something from the child component to back to the parent component. Let's call it event type string. Well, we'll call it info. And so I could do something like this. I can do plus info, and I'll put a space there. And now it should accept it. So in the second argument into emits, I can put in whatever, test. And now if I refresh it and press me, you can see here now the alert has this whatever test. So now I'm passing stuff from the child component to the parent component. Another nice feature of this script setup is that we have this top level async await, which is pretty nice. So this pressed function right here, it doesn't really do too much. It just shows this alert. But what happens if we wanted to have it display some information from a website? So let's try to do that. So I'm going to delete this function here, or I'm deleting the alert, and I'm going to actually fetch some data from a Pokemon database. So I'm going to grab some info here. We're going to wait. We're going to fetch. And I'm just going to grab from this poke api.clo/api v2/Pokemon. And I'm just going to grab something from Ditto. And to grab the data itself, I'm going to grab, by the way, I'm just going to delete this. I'm going to grab some JSON. And I'm going to wait. I'm going to do info.json. And then finally, I'm going to set it to a value that will display here. So I'm going to create a new, I'm going to create something called Pokemon. And I'm going to use this thing called ref. This actually creates a reactive variable. And I'll set it to null for right now. And to get that, we actually have to import in ref from Vue. And so this, by the way, I didn't explain, this is more of a composition API, but if you want to create reactive variables, there's something called ref and there's something called reactive, but we'll just show ref for now. And what we want to do is we'll do Pokemon.value. And by the way, anytime you use refs, you have to use .value to assign it. And we'll grab the JSON from there. And then we'll also console log out the Pokemon.value to see if it's working. And you can see right away I have these awaits. And you're probably thinking, well, can I just set this function as an async function? And the answer is yes. So if you have dealt with the composition API and you've dealt with async await functions, a lot of times you have to wrap those in a mounted or one of the lifecycle hooks, or you would have to kind of figure out a different way to do it. But this way you can actually wrap it in this async function here, and you don't have to do anything else. You don't have to like do anything special here. So now this Pokemon should have this information in here. And if we want to display it, we can just do, I don't know, we can do a div tag here. I think it's actually, we'll just do this. We'll do a div tag, we'll do vif Pokemon. And if the Pokemon exists, I'm gonna add an image, which will bind to Pokemon.sprites.back_default. So if I got that right, we should have the information we need. And don't worry about this. It's actually saying sprites does not exist on type never, because we actually never assigned it a type. So for this Pokemon, we have just ref equals null here, but we could do as any. And right now that gets rid of the TypeScript error, but we'll look at that later. So right now we have this. I'm just gonna fix this real quickly. We don't want to pass anything into it, and let's see if it works. So I'm gonna do this, press me. Oops, we actually have missing a colon here. So I'll save the colon and we'll refresh it, press me. Cool, so it actually grabbed the ditto value there for the back default. Cool, so now we were able to do an async function. Works pretty well. The last thing I want to show you guys is using adders. So this is kind of more of an advanced feature of Vue, but I think everybody should know about it. Essentially what you can do is when you pass values in from into your components, you don't have to necessarily define them all inside the props. If you don't define it in the props, it'll naturally just add it to the outermost tag that surrounds the child component, I should say. In cases like this, you're gonna have problems. So let me show you an example. So I have this hello world here, and let's say I was gonna pass in, I don't know, class equals green. So just a string called class equals green. And if I refresh the page here, you're gonna get a big error that says extraneous non-props attributes were passed in a component but could not be automatically inherited. It's because component renders fragments or text routes. So to get past that error, there's the simple ways. You just have to take the root and make sure you have one and only one single root element of your template. In this case, I'm surrounding it in a div tag. So if I do something like that, and if I try this again, I'm not getting any more errors. And I guess to show this a little bit better is, let's say I was passing green in to this hello world. I can create, I don't know, a style. And in style, I'm gonna put green class, and it's gonna be background color green. And then I can just see if that works. So you can see here, it added this background color green to it, but if I take away this div, then it goes away because it doesn't know where to put it and it gives a big error. So obviously that's probably not what you always want to do. So one thing you can do in your child component is to tell Vue that you don't want it to not automatically inherit adders, and you can basically place it where you want to place it. So fortunately, since you're using the script tag, you're probably wondering, like, how do you do this? Like, how do I tell this to not inherit adders? So if you're using the options API in the past, you would have inside your props or inside your object, when you're defining your component, you have something called inherit adders. But you can actually do the same thing. And the way it actually recommends is to create additional script setup. So don't ever feel like you have to have only one script setup inside your Vue single file component. You can have multiples, especially if you're using this script language, because there is some third-party libraries that you can't use with this script tag, with the setup. So you're gonna have to create another script tag. So you can do script tag lang equal ts. This time, don't do the setup because it isn't. And I can just do the export default. And I can put inherit adders and just put it to false. And if I do that, I'm no longer getting the error. But now it's like, how do I get the green background style to where I want it to be? Because it doesn't know where to put it. So inside your script laying TS here, this one you will have to import. You can import in, it's called use adders, and it's without the quotes, from Vue. And then you can have, basically you can have access to it. So I can do const adders equals use adders. And then I will, and by the way, you have to import it in like this. And then if I console log adders and I refresh the page, now you can see here I have class equals green in here. So if we now wanted to use this adders somewhere, we have two ways of doing it. We can, if we wanted to, we can, let's say we want to just add it to this h3 tag. We can do vbind equals, and then we can put in adders, ATTRS. So there it is, worked for us, and we don't have any errors. Or let's say we didn't even want to use this use adders at all, and let's just comment it out. There is specifically in the template, you have $adders is also available, and if I do that right, which is adders not defined, I have to save it like this. You can see it works the same way. So we can either use adders and then bind it, or we can use $adders. Now I'm not going to show you this. There's also another one for slots. There's also one called use slots. So if you're dealing with slots, you can kind of do the same thing, and you also have access to $slots in the template. So thank you guys so much for watching. That's a lot to go over. So we went over everything from using the script setup, from using define props, define emits. We used with defaults. We even looked at creating multiple setup functions. So I hope you guys learned a lot from this. So the first website, the first project I want to talk to you guys is created by Black Sonic. It's called the Vue 3 Playground. You can see it was just updated on September 20th, and it actually has its own demo, so you can kind of take a look at it. So this one, the reason I included this on the list is it has some nice features. It has a whole form here. You can see here it has this kind of cart interface, so it's almost like you're building this like a practice cart, a shopping cart. It has like payments, has credit card, debit card. You can have this checkout page. Now, if you look at the source code, I know it's gonna be kind of hard to see with my head, so I'm gonna make myself a little smaller here. So if you look at the source code right here, the source in JavaScript, there is a couple different things. There is code for normal JavaScript, so you can see how he did it. Now, this is all in Vue 3, so it'll have the setup function. You'll have watches. You can see there's this watch effect in watch. We have on mounted, so we have lifecycle hooks. We have on updated. We have checkout system. There's a whole hooks. There's hooks that he's using inside here. And it also, what's really cool is, here's the hooks file right here. It also has TypeScript. So if you want to see how these examples are done in TypeScript, you can take a look at that. And I'm looking here, here's the hooks one in TypeScript. You can see he has this product, which is an interface. The only maybe slight against this repo is that the TypeScript is pretty simple. I didn't see types for everything. I think there's multiple ways of doing types, and you can really, in your TypeScript, you can really do a lot more types, but I think this is a great example of how to use TypeScript and how to use Vue 3. So I would check it out, link in the description. The next one I wanted to talk to you guys about is the Vite Tailwind Starter. If you don't know, Vite is a really cool tool to create really fast apps in Vue. So this one is using Vite. It has Tailwind. I actually downloaded it, started it up here. You can see, you can kind of get an idea of how they used Vite. So here's the home. They have a not found. These are just views. And then inside the app view, you can see there's a lot of code in here, but at the bottom, we have this data object. So you could, I think this is a kind of cool example of using Vue 3 and using this template. It doesn't have a ton of Vue 3 setup functions and changes in it, but I think it's kind of a neat little template you can use. I wanted to include it, and I think things that are neat, I'm going to show you guys. So yeah, I would check out this Vite Tailwind Starter. Next up, this isn't really a project, but I just want to give a shout out to StackBlitz that actually have a Vue 3 section, so you can create your Vue 3 apps really quickly. I know a lot of people use CodePen, and there's a lot of these different services, but I've used a ton of these ones, and I really like StackBlitz, so this is the one I recommend. If you just click on it, if you go to stackblitz.com, you can fork it, and then you basically have a Vue 3 app out of the box. You see here it's Vue 3, and then you can start testing this stuff out using the setup function, things like that. So yeah, quick shout out to StackBlitz. Next up is a movie app. So this is on a dev article. It's a build a movie search app using the Vue Composition API. I really like this because it has just tons of information on how you would set up this app. You can see here it uses this return function. Here's the setup. Well, here's this is setup right here. He's taking out the search and emit. You can see how he's doing it in here. He even has some hooks. And he's using this watch function to grab stuff out of this API. So this is a really cool example of using the Vue Composition API, and you can obviously get the code for this and try it out yourself. So I know, and this is another one I would check out. I don't think it actually has a sample project. Yeah, here's the source code. Oh wait, the final application. Let's see if it's up and running. Oh, it's on Code Sandbox. Even perfect. I didn't even notice that when I first read this. Yeah, so you can see right here. Here it is, Composition API. This one's been around for a while. I may have even mentioned it in another Vue video, but you know, you can put in whatever you want in here. I don't know, Batman, and here's all the different Batman movies, and it's using that Composition API. So if you are uncomfortable with the Composition API, this is certainly a good way to go. And yeah, you can see he has his own hooks where he's using this watch function, use this use movie API. So if you're coming from the React world, you obviously see this use keyword a lot. And you know, unlike the Tailwind starter, we actually have pretty good examples of using the Composition API. So I would check that out. Oh yeah, and by the way, he is the same person that created the Vue 3 playground. So there you go. Another one you might want to check out is this Vue 3 real world app. So there's the examples, this real world repo where it's just tons of examples of using different frameworks and libraries. And so someone created a Vue 3 one, which is cool. So there's actually a demo here, and looks like it's just a feed of data. I'm not sure where this is coming from, but they call it conduit. If we look at the source code, I'm not going to get into it too much, but they do use composable. So they're using hooks, obviously, and using TypeScript. So this, once again, a great way of learning TypeScript is see the way other people are using TypeScript. And this is a pretty good example of it. Looks like they are, I haven't looked at this, but yeah, they're definitely using records. They're definitely trying to use TypeScript in the right way, because you can add TypeScript to a project and do it the wrong way by not adding any types to anything. So it's good they're doing that, and I think they're using some sort of, I think they're probably using a store as well. And if you want to check that out, well, you can check it out. Oh, by the way, here is the Vite Tailwind. This went around with the starter that I was mentioning before. So Vite comes with Vue 3 out of the box, and this is the starter for it, and this is what it looks like. So if you want to use Tailwind with it, you can kind of take a look. I also want to give credit to, we mentioned Black Sonic a few times, but he actually has this awesome Vue 3 repo. If you don't know what Awesome Vue is, it's a repo that has, basically it's a repo of other repos that has tons of great tutorials information. And so I got some of these examples from there. So you can see here he has a bunch of articles, he has a bunch of packages and examples. I didn't even mention a few of them, like there's a Vue 3 to-do app that someone had created, Shetland J. There's also a Vue 3 reactivity app, which you could see right here, which is made by Greg. There's also Vue cart with imports. So there's tons of Vue related examples that you can find in this repo, which I want to give credit to because that's where I found some of these. All right, so here is the Vue 3 render functions. Here's the PowerPoint I created. I'll put a link in the description below if you want to look at these slides. They'll actually be up on my Twitter. So by the way, if you haven't already, follow me there. So that's awesome. So let's take a look. Hey, and if you're new to this channel, let me tell you a little bit about me. My name is Eric. I am a software developer at Amazon. I'm also a big fan of Vue.js, React, and Angular, and I do a lot of videos and tutorials on those things on my channel. So make sure you check me out. You can also find my Twitter account at ErikCH. Go ahead and throw me a follow. That'd be awesome. and you're already on this YouTube channel, so make sure you subscribe. So render functions are really cool. So let me explain a little bit more about them. So I was, as an engineer at Amazon, we're always looking to improve our libraries, and I work on the Amplify team, and that helps you connect to a lot of different AWS services. And I thought, why don't we take a look at Vue, our implementation of Vue in our libraries, and see maybe if in some future updates we can use render functions to make some things a little more easier. So I kind of took a deep dive into it. It was definitely a big rabbit hole of what these things can do. I think the documentation isn't that great out there. There is some official documentation, but not a lot past that, and there wasn't a whole lot of examples. So the purpose of this talk is to talk a little bit more about some examples, some things I found out, some things I liked, and some things I disliked about this. So if you're completely new to Vue, let me tell you a little bit about what render functions are. So I put this in the background. We need more power, Captain, because that's exactly what render functions will give you. Basically, render functions are a way to write Vue code without templates. Basically, it's an alternative to templates. And if you come from the React world, you may kind of think of JSX, but it's not really JSX. It's a little different. But it basically is good for certain use cases. In the official documentation, they show an H1 header and how you can dynamically change it from H1 to H2 to H3 without having a big like if statement or a bunch of if statements, if else statements. So that's one way you can dynamically create HTML tags. I think it is pretty good for library creators, and it's really good when you need the full power of JavaScript. And so you'll see this kind of pattern when you're getting into more complicated apps and you need specific components that do specific things, and you're finding out just working with templates, and it's just not as powerful as you want it to be. So JavaScript will be a lot more helpful, and that's what render functions will give you. So there's really two types of render functions. So here on the left-hand side and the right-hand side, you can see, I'm gonna use my laser pointer. On the left-hand side, this render options right here is what you would see if you're using the old options API, which, by the way, it's not really old, it's still new, but it's not as new as the composition API. But you use this render function right here, and it just has this return statement. And the way it works is the first value is the tag name, the second is any attributes or elements, and the third is like what's in between the opening and closing brackets of this div, or if you're going to nest some information underneath. And we'll talk more about what this H function is in a little bit. Now, there is something called the composition API. If you've watched this channel, I've done quite a few videos on it. There's also an excellent talk at VueConf 2021, which once those videos are out, you could see that too. But here's a return statement. Remember, if you're using the composition API, you have to return it as a function. That's what right here shows you. And you see this is the same example. And this essentially, if you ran this in your Vue app, this would create an empty page with one div tag that said hello. And that's all it is. And it would be the color blue. So that's what this outputs from this code here. And by the way, I put a star here because technically there's another way you can use render functions or return what we call vnodes, which helps create the Vue.js app template, that is, and that's using like functional components, because functional components can return it. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a moment. So the next page we have here is this H function. So this is, by the way, before I move on, this is Vue 3 centric. This is what you use in Vue 3, this H function. So H function is a utility to create vnodes, which helps create your virtual DOM for your Vue app. It could perhaps be more accurately be called create vnode, but it's actually H. So when I look at this, there's three different ways, or there's three different arguments that you want for your H. So the first is like the string, object, or function. So this is usually like the tag name, like for example in div, but it could also just be a string or some kind of object, or it can be a component name too. Just realize that you can pass components in here. The second one is optional, but this is where you put your attributes, your props, and events. And it's just like an object, so you would have the prop name and then the value for it. And we'll take a look at an example of that in a moment. And the third one here at the bottom, you can see my cursor, is the value that goes in between. So this could be the nested values, like if you're going to have a div tag and another div tag, you can kind of nest it that way. Or perhaps you're just putting the values of whatever tag it is. So you could have like a text here, Here's an example. You can embed another, you see here, this is an array. It doesn't have to be an array, but you can have just multiple values inside this div tag. And look, here's a component right here. So moving on, so what are the Vue directive equivalents with render functions? So as I was kind of learning this, I was trying to figure out like what are some Vue directives that I normally use, like v-for, v-if, and how would I do this using render function? So here's a v-if. So here's the const show to refs. So I'm taking something from the props, I'm destructuring it, and then I'm just doing a ternary operator here. I'm just going to say if show value is true, then show this div, otherwise return an empty array. And this is one way to do it. You could certainly do it another way. You can create your own functions that return these h functions back, and you can just use an if statement if you wanted to. So I like the ternary because it's very simple. This is something you see in React all the time. People use ternaries, and I think this will work well. Another one is using maps. So anytime you need to iterate over a number of elements, like here's an array of fruit, then all you need to do is this fruits.map, and then you return from the fruits.map an li. So this would be like an unordered list of fruit that I wanted to display the user. And remember, this will create the template that your users will see. Here's another one, events and attributes. So this gets a little bit more complicated, but remember the second argument of your h function here is your events and attributes. So you can see here we have type equals text, name equals name, style, background equals seashell, and then on input. So this is an example of an event that you may want to have inside your Vue app. So in this input, every time someone types, it would fire this event, which then you see this name. This is part of the composition API. This is using ref. It will then set the value of that name on every basically keystroke that you have. And so you can have on input, and there's on change. There's on, all the on events are, you just label it in kind of that camel case, and you can add it inside whatever you're creating. Now slots are a big topic. I didn't get too much time to go into them inside the lightning talk, and I will touch on them a little bit more here. But you can have, remember, when you have opening and closing tags of a component, anything within inside the opening and closing tags would be considered your default slot. You can also have something called name slots, but for a default slot, if you want to use them, let's say inside a render function or inside your setup function here, you could do slot. You have to basically first to check to see if there's anything inside the slot. And then if you do, you could return it or manipulate it or do whatever you want. And if you're using the options, the API, use this.slots.default. So that's kind of cool. Just one word of warning, make sure you check to see if it exists, or you'll get this dreaded slots.default is not a function. Moving on, you can have scoped name slots too. So name slots are just anything after the slots here. So you have slots.namescope slot, that's the name of it, but I could put just slots.yellow, orange, or slots.Erik. That could be a slot name. And all you need to do is, what I'm doing here, this is a function, is checking to see if this exists, this slots.nameslots. If it does, then it returns slots.namescope slot, and it passes in the value. So the way you would use this is you could do namescope value. It's basically a function. We can pass in an object called foo, and then in our parent component, we can get access to that using this syntax. If you remember, if you ever use scope slots, or name slots, you use this template syntax that was introduced in Vue.2.6, I think. And so you put that hashtag names, or you can do vslot too, by the way. But you do hashtag name scope slot, and then equals, and then whatever you're destructuring from there, in this case, it'd be foo. So that would return bar. This would return bar. I know it's a little bit of a confusing example, but trust me, it works. And this is really powerful because you could do a lot of neat things with it. So for example, you can iterate over slot data. So I could take this name scope slot and I could pass it into other slots if I wanted to. I could pass it into other components using render functions. You could do all sorts of things with it. And then you can display it with, I created in one project a render component that all it did was it accepted a slot, or excuse me, a slot, and then it just displayed it to you using H. So I would just pass it in with H. So you can also, there's a lot of cool things. I would also look at the guide for render functions. I'll include a link to that in the bottom of this. All right, so what about multiple render functions per file? So this is something I've noticed when I was testing things out. You can create a single file component, like you hear on the left-hand side, and I can put multiple components in it, basically multiple render functions. So I have this export, and basically they call these functional components, but they can return basically fragments or H's, which are V nodes that can be displayed in the template as components. So for example, I have fruits display that has a div tag and it shows a couple of fruit. I have fruits review that has like a little emoji smiley face in it. And then I have an export default that just has a div and hello fruits. And on the right hand side, you can see here, I'm importing in the named export fruits display and fruits review and the default export fruits info. And then I'm displaying it all over here on the left hand side. And this is a valid way of using functional components with this render functions and this H function to create a template. So you can have one file here and just have a bunch of functional components that return different basically V node DOMs, different information. You can compile it all together and have it all in one file, which is really cool, and display it in one place. So here's tip number 2 is debugging. So if you start creating and you get really into creating render functions, you are going to run into things like this, where you got this really big nested form. Here's a form tag. And then inside that form tag, I have a SS, which I stand for scope slot, which I didn't put in the code right here because this was too big. But I basically created the scope slot, and I'm passing in the shows.value. And then I have an H tag, or excuse me, I have an input tag, which has, and it's on every change in the input value, it's setting the event target value. I have a button. And then I have a shows, which is what I'm going to actually show to the users. And I have this ternary operator where I'm checking to see if error.value equals what it equals. And then I have this, I'm displaying the error value. Otherwise, I go through this map where, once again, I'm doing kind of a bunch of crazy stuff here. I'm just I'm looking and pasting the show there. I'm showing the show. And then I'm looking at show.name. And you can see this gets kind of complicated. In fact, this has a bug in it. And for those of you who are eagle-eyed, you may notice on this line here, I'm not returning back the H. And since I'm doing that, it silently failed. And this was a real example I did on a YouTube video a few weeks ago, where I was trying to show you how to create a TV Finder app using render functions by itself. And you can see this is kind of hard to troubleshoot and kind of confusing because it all blends together, because you have all these H functions over and over again, and it's all nested together. So if that ever happens to you, that's okay. So this may not be the best scenario to use render functions. I remember during my talk, people said, well, the one thing I learned from this talk is not to use this. I don't think that wasn't what I was going for. What I was going for is that you can go overboard with this. It can be easy to get confused because this is so long. And what you could do is easily you can break this into smaller parts and then do it that way. Or maybe something like this would be better just as templates in a normal template instead of a render, kind of this renderless render function with these H functions. Or maybe use something like JSX. So you kind of have some flexibility there. You don't have to do it this way. I highly recommend probably not doing it this way. But I still think that there is value in some situations of using render function. All right, so that is it for my presentation. I hope you guys learned something. Hey developers, how do you use Vuex with the composition API with Vue 3? Let's chat. Okay, so I've been getting a lot of questions about the composition API, that new feature inside Vue 3, and also how it relates to Vuex. So I wanted to make just a really quick video here and explain my thoughts. First, I want to say if you want to share state management inside your Vue app, and you're using Vue 3 or using Vue 2 with the composition API plugin, it's really simple. So let me show you a quick app that can make this possible. So you can do this without having Vuex installed at all. So I went ahead in StackBlitz. I'll leave a link in the description below if you want to check this out. But basically, I created a composables folder, and inside the composables folder, I created this global file. And I'm using reactive and read only from the Vue library. I'm creating this new reactive object that has count in it. And then I have this increment, which just increments the count. And then I'm using a really simple ES6 export default, and I'm using the state and increment, so we can import this into any file. In our app Vue file here, you can see here it's starting in line 16, 15. I have this setup function, and that's, if you see setup function, that we're using Vue 3 and that we're using the composition API. And I'm actually pulling in, and don't worry about line 17 for a second, but I'm pulling in line 19 right here, the state and increment. So I'm importing it in line 11, and then I'm just grabbing the state and increment from it. And then I'm incrementing it just inside the setup function, just every time it loads, it increments. And then I'm also returning it. And I'm using this toRefs, which basically it's a way to destructure reactive objects. So that way we have access to the state, and basically the state has access to the count right here. So it's the reactive object has count in here, so we have access to it. And then we also have access to increment as well. Well, excuse me, just the count in this toRefs, but I went and returned both of them. So right up here, I have this count, which remember, since I use toRefs here, I have access to it. And then I just added this increment to this click button. So you can see here, I click the button, and it works as you expect it to. And since we're using this reactive property here, you can actually share this with every single component in your app. You can share it between routes, and it'll be reactive, and it'll save the state. So as long as you don't reload the browser, this count will be basically all over the app. It'll be reactive, and it will be shared between all the state, all the routes, and everywhere in your app. So you can create like essentially a poor man's state management system inside Vue using this method. I actually did a video on this too. If you look, it's called like Poor Man's Vuex. You can find it as well. However, if you are watching this video today, you may have realized that Vuex 4 was just released, or at least the stable build of Vuex 4 was just released recently. And one thing really cool about the stable version of Vuex 4, and if we look inside the documentation right here, if we look at the documentation that's right here, you could see for Vuex 4, we now have this new use store that you can actually import in from Vuex. So if you set up your state management system, all you need to do is use store, and then you have access to it. And you can have you can get getters and computed properties. You can access mutations and actions. And yeah, so there's a lot. And they even have a whole example here. You can pull down this whole GitHub repository and try it out. So if you're listening and you want to have the power of Vuex and the composition API, then use Vuex 4 because it is now stable and out, and it'll have that all for you. If you don't want to use that, there is other like libraries out there that kind of takes your Vuex store. If let's say you're in Vuex 3, and you can't upgrade to Vuex 4 right now, and you want to have have your data inside the composition API, inside your setup function, then there's a couple of workarounds you can do. There's a few libraries. There's this Vue hooks library. I haven't used this in a while, but it has a use state. It's called use state and use store. And so a hook for Vuex, you can use this use store, which if you look at the source code, it's pretty simple the way they do it. They also have this Vue context composition, which is another way to, basically it's like using the React use context hook from React. It's re-implemented in Vue.js 3.0. I saw this Vuex composition helpers, which once again you can try to use if you want. I think even has TypeScript support. And then there's one other way is if you have inside your setup, you can use this get current instance. And so if I mentioned before, and I kind of skipped over it, this internal instance, get current instance. If you use this inside your setup function, you can actually get access to your root, which is this internal app instance. It has this app context, but it has access to this context root, which can actually hook into $store, and then you can get your Vuex store out of that way. So those are like couple different ways you can access your store inside your setup function. Now you're probably thinking, if you're listening and you got this far, by the way, thank you so much. Make sure you click that like button and leave a comment below. Why do you even need to bother using something like get current instance or use one of these libraries? Can't you just do this .store inside your setup function? Well, no, you can't. You can't use this $store inside your setup function. You don't have access to this at all inside setup. So you do have two parameters that come into setup, the props and the context. And the context only has access to adders, slots, and emit. It used to have, I could have sworn at one time it had access to the root, but at this point, these are the three that it really has access to. So you would need to use something like get current instance so you can grab that root, which can then grab the $. Hey developers, I am going to show you two apps, one created in Vue.js, one created in React. We are going to look at the differences between the two, and I'm going to compare and contrast it and tell you, as a Vue developer, which one I like better. All right, so here we are. I have VS Code open up twice, one for my Vue.js app and one for my React app. And if you don't remember, I actually created 2 apps. If you want to, I'll put links in the description below to both of these videos where I went through from basically scratch and created an app. This is the Pokemon Picker app, where you just type in the name of whatever Pokemon you want. It grabs it from a third-party API. You click on it, and then it displays some information about it. So this one's really simple. It just has hard written in Tailwind CSS. I'm grabbing the sprites, the front and back, and just showing you some information on it. This is my React app, and the Vue app looks exactly the same. And I actually put a little bit more information in the Vue app. The card actually displays a little bit more. So that's what we have in store today. So let's take a look at and talk about first of the creating and setting up of the app. So I'm just going to riff off of this. Like I said, if you want to jump around, there's going to be links in the description. Essentially, when I created the app in Vue, Vue actually has a whole section where it asks you, using the Vue CLI, it asks you like what version of the router you want, or it asks you what router you want. It asks you if you want to add Vuex, asks what TypeScript. And all these are like the prescribed best practices for Vue. So it doesn't give you an option for 5 different routers. It tells you the Vue router you should install, and you have the option of installing it or not when you create your app. Same thing with Vuex and TypeScript. It does give you an option for CSS preprocessors, so you can choose Sass or less or whatever you want there. Vue has a prescribed way of creating their apps, and they really do recommend it for you, even when you're using Vue CLI, which is the way you usually create apps inside Vue. On the other hand, when I used React pretty much had some command line arguments that I could send in to add TypeScript or to tell it if I wanted to use NPM or Yarn, but it was pretty limited. Right away, I saw the difference there of just installing and creating an app. The Vue CLI, I think, definitely beats out the Create React app because Vue CLI gives you some of those nice options. Hit the spacebar, you can add in whatever you want when you create your app right out the door. While on the other hand, with React, you have to kind of do some research, figure out what router that you want, or what state management system you want, and then you have to install it later with NPM. In the case of Tailwind, I had to actually go literally to the Tailwind site and then follow every single step inside my Create React app to get it up and running. It was a little bit more of a pain. While on the other hand, Vue has a whole plugin system, which is pretty good. So Vue plugin system has generators, creates files for you, and then also has hooks back into Webpack, and so it can run scripts and things like that. In my case with Tailwind, I just did Vue add Tailwind, and it was added into my system and it added all the files. While on the other hand, in the React side, I had to literally go npm install the files, create all the different files, run a bunch of commands, add in something called Krakow, and do that. So that was a little bit more of a pain. I feel like, once again, Vue definitely beat out in the installation and the tooling aspect of both of those. Now, one thing I didn't play with, and if you're a React fan, you may know this, there is a Create React app has some sort of template system, or where you can put in a template and it downloads it for you. I looked for a Tailwind one, and actually I could not find one that would work out of the box with Create React app. Feels like it's still pretty limited, and then you also have to know what those are. On the other hand, Vue, if you didn't know what plugins to use, there's actually, if you just type in Vue UI, you can actually run the UI version of Vue, which I didn't show in the videos, but it's really sweet because in the UI one, you can actually just search for what plugin that you're wanting to use. So if you wanted to add in Tailwind, you just type in Tailwind at the top and it lists the plugins, and you click a button and it basically installs it into your app. So it has some, it's very, very developer friendly in that aspect. I know in React though, you did get out of the box, testing out of the box. Also the directory structure, React, and just like Vue, you get the folder structure with all different folders of where you should put things. In the React one, the unit testing out of the box as well. In the Vue one, you actually pick if you want end-to-end or unit testing when you run Vue CLI, so it's a little bit different. One thing you could see too, just from the folder structure here, Vue has this router folder that it added us once we added the router, and it has this views folder where we put the views, and then that's pretty much it. On the React side, you just really have this source folder. Well, you do have a public folder in both, but you have this source folder, and that's assuming you put everything in there. So you're really left up to how you want to organize your structure of your components. While on the Vue side with Vue CLI, you get a little bit more idea of where you should put things. Like they put a views folder for you, so you assume maybe that's where you want to put your components, and then maybe you put the rest of everything in the source folder. It gives you a little bit more direction where you want to put everything. While React, you just kind of have to decide for yourself. You can put everything in the source folder. You can create multiple folders. So I definitely saw differences in that as well. So let's talk about the next thing is the routing. Just like with Tailwind CSS, routing took a few more steps in the React world. I had an npm install it on the command line, and then I had to set everything up. On the other hand, with Vue CLI, since I added in router when I created the app, it automatically generated the files I need. So it created this router folder, and it added in all the boilerplate for you out of the box. So you could see how you add it, the path, the name, component, like how even showed you how to do lazy loading and code splitting of routes out of the box. While on the other hand, on the React side, I had to kind of Google around to figure out how to add in React Router, and then I had to kind of copy and paste this whole thing in here. I had to add this switch component, and then inside the switch component, I had to put each individual route, and then put in the path for each one of them. So it's a little bit more work. It's a little bit more boilerplate to get up and running. And I really like the Vue one where it just kind of popped up for me after I installed it, and I just could kind of copy and paste and make changes there. I will say React's router is nice that you can put opening and closing components right out of the box right here. You can see here this about. I can even pass props into it. With Vue, you can set up props in your router, but they're more like query params. So you can have your query params show up as props inside your components, which is a little weird. You can also have static props that just show up as your props. So it's a little bit different. On this, in the case of React, you could just like pass anything you want because it's inside the switch statement. So I do like that better on the React side than I do on the Vue side. One other thing too is I kind of mentioned this already, but Vue actually has this idea that you lazy load routes with this import statement, and that's all you really need to do in Vue. So this will be lazy loaded in. You just put in this import and with this arrow function. While researching React, if I wanted to lazy load routes, it sounds like you should probably use react.lazy. Adding lazy loading inside your router file makes a lot of sense. So it's a little bit different. Now you can do special imports, I believe, in both Vue and React. There's other ways to kind of lazy load things, and both have a version of suspense, which is a way that you can have like fallbacks if certain things don't load. Those are very similar there. But I kind of like the way you kind of lazy load the routes here just inside the router file. It just makes a lot of sense for me. I would say for routing, I would say this is a tie between the two, between React and Vue. You know, I like Vue how all the boilerplates for me right away, and it's really easy to lazy load routes and add everything. But I do think that this way you can pass in props in and just kind of looks a little cleaner. I definitely like this way too. So I don't know if I can pick a winner between the router and Vue and in React. And also, I'm sure there's a lot of advanced cases that I'm glossing over, which would help you determine if you think which one's better or not. So let's talk about grabbing data from a server. There is a couple of ways you can grab data from a server. I'm using Fetch, that's the built-in way. But let's take a look how we did it inside Vue first. With inside Vue, I have this home component, and inside the home component, I have this fetch statement that's in the setup. So if you didn't watch the video, I'm using the latest Vue 3 composition API instead of the older, what's called the options API. But in this case, we can run this setup function. We can run basically anything we want, and this will only run once as soon as the component loads. Now they do have, I don't want to confuse the situation, there is ways to do lifecycle hooks. So if I was trying to do something as soon as the component loaded, then I might have to use one of these lifecycle hooks. But since I'm just running it basically before create or created, this works the best. So as soon as before the component's even loaded, it runs this fetch statement. It grabs this information, and then it sets it in this reactive state right here. That's how it is. I mean, there's no real issues with, do we have to worry about timing? On the other hand, with React, when I was doing some research on it, there is a possibility that this could be rendered over and over again. One of the recommended ways inside React is to use effect, which would only render this on the initial load. So you can see here, this is the use effect. In fact, this should have empty bracket there. So in this use effect here in this app.js, this will load soon as the app loads, and it won't be re-rendered over and over again. For someone coming from Vue to React, just knowing which hooks to use, I feel is sometimes a little confusing, because beyond use effect, there's also use memo, there's use callback. And when I was doing research on this, I had to even like Google around, and I'll show you that in a second. One thing I wanted to do is on the Vue app, I had a computed property here. I wanted to see, after you download the information from the server, I wanted to filter it based on what the user typed in the input. You can see right here, when you type something, it filters it down. So that's a really easy thing to do in Vue, because what you could do is anytime anything changes in this text, you could have it run the update Pokemon computed property. And the nice thing about computed properties is that they're cached and they only run when something inside them changes, and they're really used for that kind of thing. Instead of just putting you can put it on change event on this instead and then have it run that way. But I think this is just a little bit cleaner using this computed property. So you can see here, this computed property runs the update Pokemon, which checks if the state is empty. If not, it returns this Pokemon filter, which just looks for the name in the text, and then displays it right here in this v-for loop, which we'll talk about loops in a second. So I thought that was really simple and clean to do, and that's sort of what you do on the Vue side. On the other hand, on the React side, to do what I wanted to do, I had to pull in this use memo, which was a little confusing, because what should you use memo or should you use callback? And those are two different popular hooks inside React. So when I was researching it, I went through Kent C. Dodd's blogs, because he seems to know a lot about it, and he said, first, should I use memo or use callback? Only use it for referential equality or computational expensive calculations. So technically, since we're just filtering a really simple list, this is probably not computationally expensive. So maybe this example is slightly contrived. This could be one. We could have something more complicated in here. But this will basically be updated every time the Pokemon results or text changes. And you don't actually, unlike computer properties, you don't, this doesn't have a name that you put in here. Like this computer property has a name called filtered Pokemon. Actually just gets updated and changed. And it's sort of similar on the Vue side to watch. So you have watchers in Vue, and sometimes people get watchers confused with computer properties. It's usually, most of the time, you're good with computer properties. But if you wanted something to just change at separate times and it doesn't return anything, then you would use a watch. And it sort of reminds me of this use memo. It's also like maybe use callback would be something you'd want to use. When I researched it, it says use memo is similar to use callback, except it allows you to apply memoization to any value type, not just functions. It does this accepting a function returns the value, and then that function is only called when the value needs to be retrieved. So it felt like this needed to be updated, and so I felt like use memo is the right one. But it seems like in the React world, I think this is a common thing. It's a little confusing, like which hook to use, because there could be performance problems if you don't use a hook correctly. Maybe it's updating too often. You know, it seems like React is super duper fast, but maybe like if you set this up wrong, it's going to update too many times. So leave a comment below if that's a common problem in React. So overall, between using computer properties and hooks, I really like both, but I think, you know, just for my understanding, I mean, computer properties using watchers seems like really simple to me, maybe because I'm exposed to it, and then using all these different hooks, use effect, use memo, use callback, use state, it feels a little bit more of it's going to take me a little bit more time to understand when to use one in each different scenario. Maybe I have a little bit of bias, but I certainly think that grabbing data was a little bit easier on the Vue side if I had to choose one. So let's talk about looping through data. Both of these apps, I did something similar. I had to loop through the data that was returned. In this one, I did it. Here's a v-for right here, this Pokemon, and then in the React app, I created its own component and I passed the props in and use a results.map. Really, between these two, I personally like using what are these called, are directives, like these v-for directive. It's you just pop it on to the HTML element and it does what you think it should do. On the other hand, I could see the elegance of using JSX and React, because now we're using results.map. So we're using essentially JavaScript inside our middle of our HTML here. We're checking first to see if results exist, and then we're mapping over it, and then we're applying it. And we can just return HTML inside the loop. So I see that has like a certain amount of elegance, and you can put all sorts of JavaScript expressions inside this map here. And certainly you can do multiple things. And then the same thing here with Vue, you're kind of a little bit more, a lot more limited in that aspect. And by the way, I am talking about just the way normally Vue works. You can add JSX into Vue if you really wanted to, and there is something called render functions, but typically idiomatic Vue doesn't have all those things in it. This is pretty much how you do it. You just do it with normal HTML and directives. Both of these have its ups and downs. You know, personally, once again, I really like the way Vue structures with its directives. It just makes a lot of sense to me. I think beginners would understand that more. That's where I would go. As you're getting more and more complicated, I see if I'm a power user, having just throwing in this JavaScript right inside this HTML can be a little bit more powerful at times. But I think I'm just more used to the Vue style with directives. Both have their pluses and minuses, of course. The last thing I want to say is passing data. Now in this app, we pass most of our data. If you look at this about view, we pass most of our data inside the router. And inside using the composition API, we use this use route. And then we were able to grab out of it the params, this route.params.slug. And we're able to use that to do another lookup to the Pokemon API and then pull the information out that we need. So that was really simple to do. On the React side, if we look at our about in the React side, we're grabbing data from the same thing through this slug, from basically the params, use params. It's almost named exactly the same. This is called use route, and this is called use params. And we're just grabbing the data out and then displaying it. Passing data using params was super duper easy on Vue and inside React, so I can't really tell you what's better. Now, one thing that is different, and I didn't do it in the Vue app, but I did pass data from my parent component, this app component, into my child component, which is this home component right here, this Pokemon results, and I'm destructuring it right here. In Vue, you could definitely do the same thing. It's almost exactly the same. You just pass it inside the component. There's a few key differences, though. Maybe I could do a whole video on this. So in Vue, usually you emit values back. So in React, you pass the whole functions down to your child components. In Vue, you pass in, like, that you're passing in a special value into it, and then you emit those values back. So that's quite a bit different. I won't get into the differences. I won't get into too much detail there. It's kind of hard to explain without pictures in front of you. So that's a lot different. You can also, there's this idea in React where you have this children, and you can grab data that's passed in between the opening and closing brackets of your component. And inside Vue, you use something called slots, which is a completely different idea. And there's some kind of pluses and minuses using slots versus like React children. This, I can't inconclusively say which one's better, what's better passing information in. Certainly the React params are exactly the same, but we'd have to kind of deep dive in if emitting events is a better idea than passing functions down, or if slots are better than children, things like that. I think I'm gonna have to have a tie on that one too. So overall, I mean, between these two apps, the React app definitely took me a lot longer, but I think that's mostly because I'm not a React expert. I just felt way more comfortable in Vue, just the quickness of getting it up and running. Oh, one other thing, in Vue you can use class name just as if you're using it in React, and it doesn't give you any errors. So you can use class or class name. But in React, you have to use class name instead of class, or otherwise you'll get errors in the console. I thought that was funny. It was like Vue is like, we'll allow you to use class name if you don't want to use class. So like either one of them will work. So that's why I've kind of did both in this one. So I think like Vue was way easier to like set up with my Tailwind CSS, with my React route, or with the router right out of the box. I think definitely React was harder to get set up, at least initially. When I dived into the code, since I wasn't as familiar with like use memo and some of those hooks, it took a little bit more time to get that up and running. But I really like the composition API and being able to just throw anything inside there. So I think overall I still prefer Vue, but I think I have a newfound appreciation to React and what you can do with it. I even had someone tell me in the comments that what I was doing could have been easier done with React Query. That's like even a cooler new library that allows you to just have it, like it caches results so it's even faster. So there's really cool things in the React side too that I didn't even mention. I could have done would have maybe made this app even better on the Pokemon side. So yeah, let me know what you guys think between React and Vue. I'm definitely going to continue doing Vue. Hey developers, so today we're looking at Vite 2.0. I'm going to show you guys what it's all about, talk a little bit about the ecosystem, the future of Vite versus Vue CLI, and we're also going to jump into a quick app, so stay all the way to the end. All right, so if you are new to this, Vite 2.0, as Evan Yu has said, Vite is the word for fast, and it's a new kind of build tool for front-end web development. Think a pre-configured dev server plus bundler combo, but leaner and faster, and it leverages the browser's native ES module. So it's like a really fast development server that you can use to create not just Vue apps, but React apps, Preact apps, and so much more. So it's a really cool platform that I've been using and I want to talk to you guys about. With version 2.0, Evan has been adding more and more features to it in the community. Now, like I said, it's framework agnostic. So you don't have to necessarily use Vue.js with it. You can use Vue, React, Preact, Lit Element, for example. They even have this new plugin format, so you can start adding plugins to it. So like, think of this just as a really neat build tool that you can use to quickly get up and running with these different frameworks. But that also means that it has support for resolvers, URL rebasing, and code support, and server-side rendering. And if you want to have more information, if you can go to the Why Vite page on the official documentation, it goes into even more detail of why you may want to use this build tool. So with that said, actually, I have a quick word from our sponsor, so go ahead and take it away. I want to talk about Tab 9 just for a quick moment. If you haven't heard, Tab 9 is the way to basically supercharge your auto completions inside your IDE. And what's awesome about it is it supports all modern programming languages. The way it works is you install it in your code editor, and anytime you type anything out, it gives you these really great suggestions that you should use. And the way it works is that it's AI powered, it's completely safe, it's running on your local machine, so you don't have to worry about your code going in the cloud or anything. It's been trained on a model using over 2 million pages on GitHub, so it has really great auto completion, and it supports everything including the Apple Silicon M1 chip. I've been using it for a while in my own projects. You can see here the auto completion is absolutely excellent, and what's really nice, you can try it for free. It has a free forever plan, and then if you want it to work even better, they have a pro plan that is GPU powered. Yeah, so check out Tab 9. I'm going to put a link in the description. They have been awesome. It's an awesome tool. Go ahead and get it. It's absolutely for free. And if you want to get that pro plan, it's even better. So check it out. The link will be in the description below. All right, I'm back. Tab 9 is really awesome. We're going to be using it a little bit later in this video. So let's keep going. By the way, so here's a few more features of Vite. It's instant server start, lightning fast HMR, rich features, optimized build, and so on and so forth. I'm just looking at the ecosystem of Vite and seeing all the cool things that are coming out for it. I saw, like, for example, Nuxt already has a Vite plugin. So you're probably thinking, how does that work? So essentially what you do is you create your Nuxt app like you normally do through NPX. After the app is scaffolded and created, you can swap out like the build engine. So it uses Nuxt Vite. After you do this, it's just super duper fast when you have to do reloads and starting it off. I got it mostly working with everything. It looks like they don't have it working with Composition API. If you guys are really interested in this, leave a comment below. I'll do a video on it and we can try Nuxt out with Vite. That's cool that this is already migrated over to other meta frameworks of Vue. Another really neat thing is this Vite plugin, SSR. Definitely have SSR support, server-side rendering support with Vite. And I just saw this the other day. I think, Evan, you tweeted it out. It's a Vue framework building server-rendered or static sites, but it's built on Vite too, which is built on top of Vite, which helps generate this. So I thought this was kind of neat. It's not production ready yet, but it's another really cool tool. I also saw this one tweeted out. It's called Troy. I don't. So for the French people listening, you guys can pronounce this much better than I. It's basically it combines Three.js and then it works with Vue.js or Vite. So it's not necessarily Vite specific. You can get it working with Vue.js, any Vue.js 3, even if you're using something like Vue CLI. But I thought this is cool, and you can actually see one of the demos. Here's some examples. I mean, using Vite and Three.js and Vue, which is really cool. So yeah, check that out. I'll make sure I put a link in the description to all these different things that are happening in the Vue ecosystem. One thing that I heard, I was just watching, if you haven't already checked it out, Vue.js Amsterdam had a really cool conference, but they have some of the videos up for free, and one of them was the state of Vue, or the Vuenion. I couldn't find the slides, but I did find this one screenshot, or I went to this place in the video. So a lot of people are thinking, well, Evan Yu has been talking a lot about Vite as this new build tool for Vue, but what does it fit in when you have Vue CLI already? For the short term, Evan was saying that they will coexist together, which is awesome, but in the long term, he definitely sees some of the features of Vite being added to Vue CLI, or Vue CLI being added to Vite, so they might combine at one point, but you can definitely use both of them, either one or if you're creating Vue 3 apps. I wanted to talk to you guys about trying to get Vite up and running, so let's just jump into an app here. Cool, so I have an app, and by the way, I have tab 9 autocomplete. There will be a link in the description, you guys can check that out. I do have 2 other plugins that I'd highly recommend if you're using Vite, especially today I was going to try to set up Vite with a Vue 3 app with TypeScript. And the 2 that you really want to install is something called Vitor, which is the Vue tooling for VS Code. So make sure you install that. And then also Vue.js, which is the advanced TypeScript JavaScript support. By the way, there's 2 of them in here. One of them is like a beta version, or very, very new, and it's not as tested, so I wouldn't use that one. This one right here. I would use the one that has 11,000 downloads as of this recording. There's also another plugin, and this was mentioned in the Vue Amsterdam, and when you install Vite, you can use something called Volar. It doesn't really work well if you're using Vitor and Volar at the same time, so I would choose one or the other. And I have the latest version of Node. If you look at the official documentation for Vite, I can go to the Get Starting Guide, and it just says npm init at Vue.js at Vite.js/app. So I'm just going to copy and paste that in here. Okay, so first thing it asks is a project name, and so we'll just type in YouTube proj. And then this is cool. So this is all the different templates that are available with Vite, since this build tool supports more than just Vue.js. So you can do Vue, Vue.ts, React, React.ts, Preact, or Lit. So I'm going to use Vue and TypeScript, and then it just tells you to go ahead and change directories into it, and then do an npm install, and then you can run dev. So let's go and do that real quickly. Cool, so it's up and running. And now I should be able to npm run dev, and it should open up really quickly in port 3000. So if I go to port 3000, here it is. So I have a Vite app, or Vue 3 app, up and running. Basically, it's a Vue 3 app, and even tells you, I mentioned those ID setups, so you can do either Vitor or Volar and VS Code, and then I would use also the Vue.dx as well. And it even has a little sample of how it works. So I thought it'd be fun if we could try to get this working with the latest version of Vuex, Vuex 4 with TypeScript. So let's do that. First, I need to change folders. All right, so let's go ahead and install Vuex 4. And if you look at the official documentation, it's pretty easy. All you need to do is npm install Vuex at next, and it'll still take a moment. Okay, so it's installed. All right, so let's go ahead and see if we can add TypeScript in to our app, our Vite app here for Vuex. So if you look at the official documentation, it tells you should probably add in this type definition file. That way when you do this.store, it'll actually show up correctly. So I'm going to copy this, and in the source folder, I'm going to create a new file called vuex.d.typescript. And just for now, I'm going to copy and paste it inside. And now I need to go in and set up our store. So we're going to create a really basic store. I'm going to call it store.typescript. And inside the store.typescript, I'm going to create a few things. So I'm going to create an export for an interface. And so I'm going to type this all out, and I'll be back with you in 1 second. Okay, so I went ahead and typed everything out. And so this is a really basic example. In fact, I copied some of it from the official documentation. But essentially, this store has a state. It just has a count in it. And then I added in a mutation to mutate it, and an action to increment it. And you use in Vuex 4, you use this create store, which is a way to create the store inside of it. And then we can also assign it which type it is, type state. And you might see something weird, this key right here. This key is a part of Vuex 4. And in the official documentations, they say that it's basically an injection key. And this injection key has to be added in anytime you import this in for the types to work correctly. So I'll show you how that works. Now we have the store in, so let's make sure that we actually include it when the app loads. So inside the main TypeScript file, we're gonna have to do a little bit of change here. We're going to do const app here. And then instead of mounting it at this point, we will mount it at some point. But I want to use this app.use, and this app.use is where we can add in third-party libraries and things like that. So we're going to add a store and a key to it, and then we're going to mount it. And nice thing about TypeScript, I can do control dot, and it'll find where it's at, control dot, or command dot if you're a Mac, and it should found it. So it found both what's in the key and store. And now we should have this load up correctly and we should be able to access it. So if I go back into my components here, and by the way, see here, here's a bunch of stuff we don't need in this hello world. We do have a message. I'll make sure I delete it all. Oh, don't worry about this ESLint message. And we have this define component. You can see this ling equals TS because we're using TypeScript, but we should be able to import it inside the setup function since we're using Vue 3. So to do that, we use this const, we'll call it store equals useStore, and then we pass in the key that we created before. And once again, I can do control period here, control dot, I can import it in from useStore, control dot, import key from module store. So that works perfect for us. And now we can grab stuff out of it. So let's say I wanted to create a button that does an increment here. And by the way, let me go to my app view. Get rid of this logo. So I want to actually have a button that increments. So I'm going to create a button up here. Press me. And then I'll have a counter here, which I'm going to have to add. So I'm going to const, and we're going to use increment, which is going to be a method. And that's going to do store.dispatch, and we're going to do increment. And you can see here we're getting auto completions here, which is awesome. We're also getting a little bit of our tab 9 to help us too while we're typing this out, which is awesome. And then if I want to actually grab the counter, I'm going to call it counter. I'm going to use a computed property, and this computed property is store.state. And then I'm going to have, you can see here, right here, we have auto completion here, which says count. That's from TypeScript. And then computed, I can just hit control dot, and we can add computed from declaration to view. So we just went ahead and added it. And now we can pass both these out. So I'm going to pass counter and increment. And if I did this right, I should add in an event here. So every click, it does the increment. Should work. So let's see if it works. I'm npm run dev, and look, it loaded already. It's super duper quick. Here's the app. Here it is. And I'm pressing it. Sweet. So you can see here, now I am using my Vuex store, and I have types set up. And just to show you a little bit more, we have types on our store. So you can see here we have store.state. We are getting our getters and state, everything else that we expect. Our dispatch and commit. Our commit. We can see here, here's tab 9 telling us how we can commit it in there, which is awesome. We can also, if we're using like the mounted hook, so let's say we're not using Vue 3 and we're just using regular Vue and we're using the data and the methods. If you do this.store, you can see here we have our getters, our state, and here's our count. Even tab 9 even sees it. So our TypeScript's working. We're able to grab our types from it. Things seem to be working great. So yeah, this is just a quick example of how you may want to use Vite. One thing definitely with Vite is that it doesn't have the plugin system that Vue CLI has. So if you're looking to just quickly add in a bunch of things, you might have to just install them through the npm system and then configure it yourself. Also, out of the box, you're not getting those really cool prompts like you have in Vue CLI where it asks you if you want to install the router, if you want to install some other plugins. You're going to have to do that all yourself, and you may run into some problems if you don't know how to configure it, and Vite is slightly different. But so far, I'm pretty impressed with Vite. It's super fast. I definitely think on my next projects, I'll be using it. Let me know in the description below if you think this was useful or helpful. Through it pretty quickly, but make sure you just pause it and try to understand. And also, yeah, check out our sponsor tab 9. It's absolutely free. If you do buy the premium version, it does cost a little bit of money, but it actually has even better autocomplete results. I believe it has like a server that it encrypts data and it comes back and it tells you some suggestions for you. Yeah, so check that out. I appreciate it. Thanks.